I always liked hiking alone. There was something calming about being surrounded by nothing but trees and the soft sounds of the forest. It was 2018, and I was 32 years old. I lived in Oregon, close to the Cascade Mountains, where the trails were thick with pine and fir trees. On a clear Saturday morning in early September, I decided to hike a trail I hadn't done before, a lesser-known path called Eagle Ridge Trail. It was supposed to be about 8 miles round trip, moderately difficult, and I liked the idea of something off the beaten path. I packed my usual gear: a backpack with water, snacks, a first aid kit, a map, compass, flashlight, and a pocket knife. I had my phone, but I wasn't expecting much signal out there. I left around 8 a.m. from the small parking lot near the trailhead. The air was crisp, with a hint of fall coming in the breeze. I was wearing sturdy hiking boots, cargo pants, and a fleece jacket. The sky was bright blue, and the sun filtered through the tree branches, casting dancing shadows on the ground. At first, the trail was easy to follow. Dirt path, some rocks here and there, roots crossing occasionally. The smell of pine and damp earth was strong. Birds chirped softly, and now and then I saw a squirrel darting up a tree or a woodpecker tapping on a trunk. I felt good. Hiking cleared my mind. I didn't have much company during the week, working from home, so these hikes gave me a chance to be alone with nature and my thoughts. Around the 2-mile mark, the trail started to slope upward. The trees grew taller, the forest denser. The path narrowed and became rockier. I stopped for a moment to drink water and eat a granola bar, sitting on a large fallen log. The sun was warm on my face, and I could see the valley below, a patchwork of green and gold. I took a deep breath and continued. After about another mile, I came to a fork in the trail. My map showed that the right path would lead to a viewpoint called Eagle's Perch, a rock outcrop overlooking the ridge. The left path continued deeper into the forest. I wanted to see the view, so I took the right fork. The path grew rougher. Small rocks and branches covered it, and I had to watch my step carefully. The trees thinned out, replaced by shrubs and patches of grass. The sun was higher now, and the wind picked up, carrying the sharp scent of pine resin and dry earth. When I reached Eagle's Perch, it was even more beautiful than I imagined. The rock jutted out over the edge of the ridge, with a clear view of the valley stretching miles away. I sat down to rest, took out my camera, and snapped some pictures. It was peaceful. Then I noticed something strange. Far below in the valley, I saw smoke rising. A thin column, grayish and curling slowly into the sky. It looked like a campfire, but there was no camping area nearby. The valley was mostly forest with no roads visible from here. I packed up quickly, feeling a little uneasy. The wind had grown stronger, and clouds were moving in fast. I checked my watch, it was just past noon. I decided to head back and take the left fork I had passed earlier. My plan was to loop around the ridge and return to the main trail, completing the hike as planned. I retraced my steps carefully down the rocky slope. The wind rustled the leaves and made the branches creak. It felt colder now. I pulled my jacket tighter around me. When I reached the fork again, I took the left path. The forest swallowed me up. The light dimmed under the thick canopy. The trail was faint, covered with needles and leaves. It was harder to follow. I stopped several times to check my map and compass, making sure I was on course. After about half an hour of walking, I realized something. The trail markers had stopped. No painted blazes on trees, no carved signs on rocks. The path looked less used, almost forgotten. The underbrush was thicker, with bushes reaching into the path. I pushed through, careful not to make noise. The deeper I went, the more the forest changed. The trees were older, larger, and closer together. The ground was damp and soft with moss. I could hear the distant sound of running water, maybe a creek nearby. Then I heard a strange noise. At first, it was faint, a snapping of twigs, maybe, but it wasn't like the usual sounds of animals. It was irregular, deliberate. Something was moving off the trail somewhere to my right. I froze. My heart pounded. I scanned the shadows between the trees but saw nothing. I stayed still for a long moment, listening. The noise stopped. I decided to keep going but faster now. My mind was on edge. I didn't like the idea of being alone in this part of the forest where the trail was barely there. Suddenly, the ground beneath me shifted. I stumbled and fell forward onto loose dirt and rocks. My right knee scraped hard against a jagged stone. I bit back a shout of pain and rubbed the skin. It was bleeding, but not badly. As I stood, I saw something odd. Tracks in the dirt, large footprints spaced far apart. They looked human, but were bigger than mine. The prints weren't fresh, maybe a few hours old. I felt a cold shiver. I had read about hikers getting lost or worse in this area. Some people came here to do illegal things, sometimes hunting without permits or even worse. The thought made me quicken my pace. I kept following the trail as best as I could, but the path disappeared completely at one point. The forest closed in tight, with no clear way forward. I pulled out the map again and checked my compass. I was supposed to be heading northwest to get back to the main trail, but I wasn't sure if I'd made a wrong turn earlier. I sat on a fallen tree, exhausted. The wind was howling through the trees now, and dark clouds covered the sky. I knew I needed to get out of here before nightfall. I didn't want to spend the night in the forest, especially not here. After resting for 10 minutes, I stood up and tried to retrace my steps to the fork. But the forest all looked the same. I couldn't tell one direction from another. My compass needle seemed to spin slightly. Maybe it was the magnetic rocks in this area. I pulled out my phone, hoping for signal. Nothing. No bars. Panic started to creep in. I tried to calm down. I checked my supplies. Water was half gone. Snacks were mostly eaten. My flashlight was still good, but I wanted to save batteries. I decided to follow the sound of running water. Streams often lead to larger creeks or rivers, which sometimes run close to roads or trails. I moved carefully, pushing through the underbrush. The ground was slippery with moss and wet leaves. I slipped once and nearly fell again. After about 20 minutes, I reached a small creek. The water was cold and clear, trickling over smooth stones. I knelt and drank some water, filling my bottle. Then I noticed something near the creek. A rusted metal can, crushed and old. A torn piece of fabric caught on a branch. The kind of thing left behind by people. My heart jumped. I was definitely not alone. I followed the creek downstream, hoping it would lead me somewhere familiar. The forest seemed darker now, and the wind carried a strange smell, smoke. I looked ahead and saw a faint glow between the trees. Smoke, like from a fire, rising above the treetops. My skin crawled. I approached carefully and discovered a small clearing. In the center, a fire pit with burning embers. Around it, some makeshift camp gear. A tarp tied between two trees, empty food cans, and a few clothes. No people in sight. I scanned the area for footprints or signs, but the ground was disturbed. Fresh footprints, large and heavy, going in all directions. I felt trapped. This place was not a friendly campsite. Felt dangerous. I decided to get away as fast as I could. I looked around for another path and spotted a faint trail leading uphill. I took it. The trail climbed steeply, rocks scraping my boots. The wind blew hard, and dark clouds moved closer. The sky was turning gray. I reached a ridge and paused to look around. From here, I could see faint outlines of other ridges and valleys. Somewhere far off, I thought I saw a thin line of a road. Hope filled me. I set off downhill, following the line of sight toward the road. The forest thinned as I moved down. The ground was less rough, and I could hear cars faintly. After nearly an hour of walking, I broke through the trees onto a dirt service road. I walked along it, hoping to find a main road or someone. After another 20 minutes, I saw headlights. Car appeared, driving slowly. I waved my arms and shouted. The driver stopped. It was a park ranger. He listened as I explained I had gotten lost on Eagle Ridge Trail, followed the wrong path, and found an abandoned camp. He nodded, told me they had been looking for me, and that there had been reports of illegal activity in the area. People setting fires, sometimes drug use, and some dangerous trespassers. He radioed for backup and gave me water and food. They escorted me back to the parking lot, safe. Later, I learned from the ranger that the abandoned camp was part of a small group of trespassers who had been evicted but kept returning. They were known to be aggressive toward hikers. I never went back to Eagle Ridge Trail. Looking back, I realized how I remember that hike clearly, even though it happened many years ago. It was the summer of 2011, and I was 29 years old. I decided to go hiking alone in the Cascade Mountains of Washington State. I was familiar with the area and had done many hikes before, so I thought this would be just another trip to clear my head and enjoy nature. I didn't expect it to turn into something I still think about often, something that felt very real and terrifying with no fantasy or superstition involved. Just pure survival. I had planned to hike a 20-mile loop trail that was known for its breathtaking views and quiet forests. The weather forecast was clear, with a slight chance of rain in the evening. I packed light but enough for an overnight stay. A tent, sleeping bag, some food, water, a first aid kit, a map, a compass, and a small knife. My phone was fully charged, but I knew there would be no signal out there. I had told a friend where I was going and when I expected to be back. I started early in the morning, just as the sun was rising. The air was crisp and fresh, with the smell of pine needles and wet earth all around. The trail was quiet except for the soft sounds of birds and my footsteps on the dirt path. The forest was dense, tall trees surrounding me on both sides, their leaves forming a thick canopy that filtered the sunlight. As I walked, I noticed small details everywhere. The rough bark on the trees, mushrooms growing at their bases, insects crawling along the leaves. I felt calm and alone in a good way, like I was connected to something bigger. I stopped occasionally to take pictures with my camera, to rest or to drink water. Around midday, the trail started to climb steeply. My legs burned as I pushed myself upward. Sweat dripped down my forehead, and I could hear my breathing getting heavier. The trail narrowed and became rockier, making it harder to keep balance. The sun was higher now, but the forest still felt cool because of the shade. Occasionally, I caught glimpses of distant mountain peaks covered in snow. After about 5 hours of hiking, I reached a small clearing where the trail split. According to my map, one path continued up to a ridge with a view of the valley below, while the other led to a small lake where I planned to camp overnight. I chose the path toward the lake, eager to set up camp and rest. The lake was beautiful, calm and clear, reflecting the blue sky and the trees around it. I found a flat spot near the shore and pitched my tent. After drinking some water and eating a light snack, I sat by the lake, enjoying the quiet. The only sounds were the occasional splash of fish and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. As the afternoon passed, the sky began to change. Clouds slowly gathered, turning from white to dark gray. I checked the weather app on my phone one last time before it lost signal. Rain was coming, probably in the next few hours. I decided to stay put in my tent when the storm arrived. Night came faster than I expected. The wind picked up, and the rain started as a light drizzle, then quickly turned into a steady downpour. I lay inside my tent, listening to the rain hitting the fabric. It was soothing at first, but then strange sounds caught my attention. I heard something moving outside, something heavy brushing through the bushes. My heart quickened. I reminded myself it could be animals, maybe a deer or a bear passing by. I stayed still, trying to listen carefully. Then, a loud crack echoed through the forest, like a large branch breaking. The rain masked some sounds, but I heard heavy footsteps moving closer and then away. I felt trapped inside the tent, vulnerable and exposed. The night was long. The rain never stopped. Every few minutes, I heard noises, twigs snapping, something brushing against the tent, low grunts or growls. I tried to stay calm, reminding myself this was nature, that animals lived here, and I was in their home. I had bear spray in my backpack, but I didn't want to risk stepping outside in the storm. At some point, I fell into a restless sleep, waking often to check my surroundings. I could hear the rain mixed with those strange sounds, like something circling my camp. Morning finally came. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still gray and heavy. I crawled out of my tent, my clothes soaked, and looked around. The ground was muddy, and there were deep footprints in the soft earth near my tent. Big, wide, and uneven, definitely not human. They circled around where I had camped. My stomach tightened. I had been close to a large predator, most likely a bear. I felt lucky to have stayed safe, but also scared knowing how close it had come. I packed up quickly, keeping an eye on the footprints and looking for signs of the animal. I started hiking back on the trail, following the path toward the main trailhead. The forest was still quiet, the air fresh after the rain, but I felt different, cautious, alert, aware of every sound. As I walked, I noticed broken branches along the path, as if something big had passed through in a hurry. I also saw claw marks on some trees. I kept my bear spray ready, and my knife was in my hand. I kept telling myself to stay calm, to keep moving, and not to panic. I tried to keep the phone in my pocket, hoping for a signal. Hours passed. I was tired, hungry, and muddy, but I didn't stop. I focused on the trail markers and the map. Then, suddenly, I heard a low growl behind me. I froze, heart pounding. The bushes rustled violently. I turned slowly, holding the bear spray up, ready to use it. A large black bear emerged from the trees, about 30 feet away. It looked big and wild, its fur wet from the rain, eyes fixed on me. I stayed still, breathing slowly, trying not to look like prey or a threat. The bear growled again, more loudly. Then it charged. Instinct took over. I sprayed the bear spray directly at its face as it got closer. The bear roared, shaking its head, and then stopped suddenly, coughing and stumbling back into the bushes. I didn't wait. I turned and ran as fast as I could, stumbling over roots and rocks, adrenaline pushing me forward. The bear didn't follow. I ran for nearly an hour, not looking back, until I reached the main trailhead where I saw a group of hikers. They called for help and gave me food and water. I stayed there until the park rangers arrived. They told me the bear had been seen in the area, aggressive and hungry after the recent storms. They took my statement and helped me get back to my car. I never went back to that part of the forest again. The experience stayed with me, the quiet fear, the close calls, the raw power of nature. It wasn't a ghost or something made up. It was real life, real danger, and I was lucky to get out alive. I had been planning this trip for months. Ever since I moved to Portland, I wanted to escape the city noise and get lost in the woods, just me and the trail. The Cascades had always called to me with their deep forests and endless trails. I picked a route that promised solitude, a long stretch through some remote parts of the Mount Jefferson wilderness. The plan was to hike for 3 days, camp under the stars, and come back feeling a little lighter. I thought it would be easy. I thought I was prepared. I packed my gear carefully. A sturdy backpack loaded with a tent, sleeping bag, food for 3 days, water filter, first aid kit, map, compass, and a flashlight. I didn't want to rely on my phone much, no signal in the wild, and I wanted to be present. I dressed in layers with a waterproof jacket just in case. The morning I left, the air was crisp but the sun was already high. I parked my car at the small trailhead parking lot, which was nearly empty. A few other hikers were there, but they were leaving or resting, not starting the same route as me. I started walking, my boots crunching over the dry needles and leaves. The trail was narrow and winding, surrounded by towering fir and pine trees. The light filtered softly through the branches, casting long shadows on the forest floor. I breathed deep and felt the calm settle in my chest. The sounds were quiet, birds calling, the soft rustle of a breeze, the distant drip of water from wet rocks. The first day passed slowly but steadily. I moved at my own pace, stopping to drink and rest, sometimes sitting on a mossy log to watch a squirrel or a jay. The trail climbed gradually, revealing small clearings where I could see distant peaks. I kept my map handy, double-checking every now and then to make sure I stayed on course. By late afternoon, I found a good spot to set up camp near a small stream. The sound of running water was comforting. I pitched my tent, boiled some water for dinner, and settled in. As the sun sank, the forest grew darker, the shadows longer and the sounds sharper. I lay inside my tent, listening to the night chorus, feeling the deep peace that only comes from being truly alone in nature. But as the night deepened, I heard something else. A distant crunching, a faint snapping of twigs. My heart beat a little faster, but I told myself it was probably a deer or some other animal. I reminded myself that this was their home, and I was just a visitor. I was tired, and after a while, I drifted to sleep. The second day started with heavy fog. It hung low among the trees and thickened as I climbed higher. The trail became slippery and the rocks wet. I kept my eyes on the ground, careful with each step. The forest was quiet, but the fog made it feel strange, like the world had shrunk, and I was walking inside a white cloud. I tried to keep track of the trail markers, but the fog made them hard to see. At one point, I thought I saw a marker, but then I couldn't find the next one. I stopped and pulled out my map and compass. The map was old and some details didn't match exactly. I tried to use the compass to head north, but the thick trees blocked the view, making it hard to judge distances or landmarks. After a while, the fog began to lift, revealing a rocky ridge above. I climbed carefully, watching for loose stones. From the top, I could see a wide valley below, thick with trees and mist. I took out my camera and snapped a few pictures. I felt small and alone, but strangely alive. By midday, I reached a fork in the trail. My map showed two possible routes, one longer but easier, the other shorter but steeper. I chose the shorter one, eager to save time. That decision changed everything. The trail got rough quickly. The dirt path disappeared under rocks and roots. I had to scramble up a narrow ledge at one point, using my hands to steady myself. My legs ached, and my breath came faster. The sun peeked out and dried some of the wet stones, but the path was still tricky. Then I heard it, a deep, low growl from somewhere behind a thick patch of bushes. My heart stopped. I froze, trying to see what was there. The bushes moved slightly, but I couldn't tell what it was. My mind flashed to bears, mountain lions, or other predators. I remembered the advice: stay calm, don't run, make yourself look big. I took out my whistle and blew hard, loud and steady. The growl stopped. The bushes were still. I waited, holding my breath, listening. After a few tense moments, I heard nothing else. Slowly, I moved on, my eyes scanning every shadow. The rest of the day was a struggle. The trail kept climbing, then dropping sharply. I crossed a few small streams, using rocks as stepping stones. My feet were wet and blistered. I drank water sparingly. As evening came, I was still miles from my planned campsite. I decided to stop early near a small clearing. I set up my tent with shaking hands, lit a small stove, and ate some cold food. The sun set quickly, and cold air seeped in. I heard animals moving nearby, a distant howl, the snap of a branch. I lay awake, feeling exposed. The third day started cold and gray. I knew I had to get back to the car before dark. My legs were sore, and my backpack felt heavier than ever. I followed the trail downhill, the trees thinning out as I approached the edge of the wilderness. But then, something went wrong. I reached a wide river crossing. The map showed a bridge, but I could see no sign of it. The river was swollen from recent rains, the water rushing fast and deep. I searched the banks for a safe place to cross, but everything looked dangerous. I considered turning back, but the daylight was fading. I found a fallen log that stretched across a narrower part of the river. It was slick and wobbly, but the only option. I tested it with my foot. It held. I took a deep breath and stepped on. Halfway across, my foot slipped. I grabbed at the log, heart racing. My backpack dipped in the water. I froze, muscles tense. The log creaked under me. I carefully moved forward, reaching the other side soaked and trembling. That crossing was the worst part. From there, the trail was less clear. The fog rolled in again, and the trees looked unfamiliar. I realized I must have taken a wrong turn somewhere. Panic crept in. I pulled out the map and compass again, but the forest felt endless and the landmarks didn't match. I tried to retrace my steps, but everything looked the same. Hours passed. The sun set and I was still lost. My flashlight's batteries were low. My food was nearly gone. I felt the cold seep deeper. I wrapped myself in my jacket and tried to stay calm. I kept walking, hoping to find a road, a sign, anything. Then I saw the light. Far off through the trees, a faint glow. I hurried toward it, heart pounding. It was a small cabin, dimly lit. I was exhausted but relieved. I approached quietly and found the door unlocked. Inside, it was empty, but there was firewood and some blankets. I started a small fire, warming my hands. I was safe, at least for the night. The next morning, I used the cabin's old phone. The line was spotty, but I managed to call a friend who came to pick me up. I learned later that the trail I took was partially closed due to a recent storm. The bridge was washed away, and many paths were blocked or rerouted. My choice to take the shorter route and my failure to notice the closures almost cost me dearly. This trip changed me. It wasn't the peaceful escape I planned. It was a fight to stay calm, stay alive, and find my way back. The wilderness is beautiful, but it doesn't care about your plans or your safety. It's honest and brutal. I carry that lesson with me now. Always respect the trail, prepare for the worst, and never underestimate the power of the forest. I always thought hiking was something simple. Just put on your boots, carry a pack, follow a trail, and enjoy the quiet of the mountains. I'd done it a few times before, mostly short-day hikes, but this time I wanted to challenge myself. I planned a solo backpacking trip deep into the Colorado Rockies. It was late August 1997, the kind of summer that was just starting to cool down. The trail I chose was off the beaten path, something I found on an old hiking forum. It promised wild views, untouched forests, and the kind of peace that only comes when there's no one else around for miles. I was 25, fit, confident, and I thought I knew what to expect. I packed light but enough. A tent, sleeping bag, a small stove, dehydrated food, water purification tablets, a first aid kit, and a map with a compass. No GPS back then. I had studied the map for hours before heading out. The trail was about 30 miles, winding through valleys, rivers, and high ridges. I planned to camp 2 nights out there, coming back on the third day. I felt prepared. The first day was easy. The sun was bright. The air smelled fresh with pine and wet earth. The path was narrow but well-marked, twisting through the trees. Birds sang. A few squirrels darted ahead and paused to look at me before running away. The only sounds were the crunch of my boots on the dirt and the occasional wind rustling through the branches. I moved at a steady pace, stopping to drink water and rest every hour. I crossed a small creek and filled my bottle, careful to use the purification tablets later. By midday, I found a flat clearing to eat lunch. I ate some granola bars, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. Everything was perfect. I thought about how nice it was to escape the noise of the city, the endless buzz of phones and traffic. Out here, it was just me and nature. As the afternoon stretched on, the trail climbed steadily. I could see the peaks ahead, jagged and gray against the sky. The wind picked up, colder now, but the sun was still strong. I kept going, eager to reach the campsite I had marked near a small lake at the base of one ridge. The map showed a good spot with flat ground and fresh water nearby. Around 4 p.m., the first warning signs appeared. The sky, which had been clear blue all morning, started turning a dull gray. Clouds gathered quickly, low and heavy. I paused to check the map, glancing nervously at the horizon. I'd seen weather change fast in the mountains before, but this looked different. Thicker clouds, like a wall creeping over the peaks. The wind was sharp now, carrying a chill that bit through my jacket. I decided to speed up. I didn't want to be caught in bad weather far from shelter. My heart beat faster, not from the climb but from a growing unease. As I pushed forward, the first drops of rain fell, small at first, then harder. I pulled my rain jacket over my pack and zipped up tight. The trail became slick with mud and wet leaves, my boots slipping slightly on the rocks. I reached the lake just as the rain turned into a steady pour. The campsite was exactly as the map promised. Flat ground, enough trees to shield from the worst of the wind. I quickly set up my tent, hands shaking from cold and effort. The rain hammered the fabric, loud and unrelenting. I crawled inside, zipped up, and sat on my sleeping pad, feeling soaked and tired. The storm grew worse. Thunder rolled over the mountains, distant but close enough to make my chest tighten. Lightning flashed between the clouds, lighting up the dark gray sky like a strobe. I could hear the wind tearing through the trees, the sound like a scream. I lay in my tent, listening, hoping it would pass quickly. I ate a cold meal, trying to keep warm, but the wet had seeped into my clothes. I boiled some water for tea, my fingers numb as I sipped slowly. Outside, the storm raged for hours. I thought about what could go wrong. Falling branches, flash floods, or worse. But I told myself I was safe enough here. At some point during the night, the rain lessened to a drizzle. The wind still shook the tent walls, and somewhere outside, water was running fast. I didn't sleep well, waking every hour to listen. The sound of running water became louder. Morning came gray and cold. I poked my head out of the tent. The lake was swollen and muddy, the usual clear surface now churned by the storm. The trail was soaked and slippery. I felt cold and stiff but knew I had to keep moving. I packed up quickly, careful to keep my gear dry. As I started down the trail, I noticed something strange. The creek I had crossed yesterday had swollen into a raging river. Where the water had been ankle deep, it now roared over rocks and branches. The trail disappeared in places underwater. I looked at the map, trying to find a way around, but there were no easy detours. I decided to follow the river upstream, hoping it would lead to a bridge or shallower crossing. My boots sank into the mud, my legs heavy with waterlogged gear. Every step was a struggle. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still full of low clouds. The air smelled wet and fresh, but the constant roar of the water filled my head. After a couple of hours, I found a fallen log over the river. It was slick and covered with moss, but it looked like the only way across. I balanced carefully, arms out, heart pounding. Halfway across, my boot slipped. I grabbed at the log, my hands wet and trembling. For a moment, I felt the river's icy pull at my feet. I held tight and made it across, breathing hard and feeling shaken. Once across, the trail climbed steeply into the forest again. I was cold and tired, but the thought of being trapped on this side kept me moving. The trees here were dense, thick trunks covered with moss and hanging vines. The ground was soft with fallen leaves and pine needles. It was eerily quiet, except for the distant roar of the river. I stopped to rest beside a tree, leaning against the rough bark. My legs ached, my clothes still damp. I ate a handful of trail mix, trying to gather strength. The sun was still hidden behind clouds, and the wind had died down. I kept hiking, hoping the trail would lead me out soon. But after another hour, I realized something was wrong. The markers I had counted on, the painted blazes on trees, were missing. The trail seemed to vanish beneath the underbrush. I looked around, feeling a cold dread settle in my stomach. I checked my compass. My map showed the trail should curve around a ridge ahead, but all I saw was thick forest, uneven ground, and no clear path. I tried to retrace my steps back to the river crossing, but the mud and wet leaves made it almost impossible to find my footprints. Panic crept in. I was lost. The thought hit me hard. I was alone, deep in the wilderness, with a storm behind me and no clear way forward or back. My mind raced through worst-case scenarios. I had no phone, no GPS. I could only rely on my map, compass, and whatever survival skills I had. I forced myself to breathe slowly. Panic wouldn't help. I remembered my training. Stay calm, conserve energy, find shelter. I looked for a spot to rest and think. The ground was uneven, but I found a small clearing under some tall pines. I sat down, took off my pack, and tried to dry my hands on my jacket. Hours passed. I tried walking in different directions, marking trees with my pocket knife to avoid walking in circles. Nothing looked familiar. The sky grew darker as afternoon turned to evening. I realized I was going to have to spend another night out here. I set up my tent again, this time in the clearing. The ground was uneven and hard, but it was better than nothing. I boiled water, ate a little, and tried to stay warm. My body ached in new ways, cold muscles, stiff joints. I wrapped myself in my sleeping bag and lay down, listening to the forest. The night was long. The forest sounds seemed louder in the dark. The rustle of leaves, distant animal calls, the snap of twigs. I told myself it was just the normal sounds of wildlife, but every noise made me jump. I thought about people at home, wondering if they even knew I was gone. Sleep came in short bursts. When I woke, I checked my compass and map again, trying to find any clue about my location. I noticed a faint smell of smoke carried on the wind. Someone else was out here somewhere. That thought was both comforting and worrying. The next morning, I decided to follow the smell. I packed up quickly and started walking in the direction it seemed strongest. The forest thinned as I climbed a gentle slope, and after a while, I saw a thin column of smoke rising between the trees. I moved toward it cautiously, careful not to shout or make loud noises. Soon I found a small clearing with a campsite, a fire still smoldering in a stone ring. There were footprints around, fresh but no people in sight. I called out softly. No answer. I sat down on a log, heart pounding. This was the break I needed, but it also reminded me I wasn't alone in this wilderness. Maybe the people who left the fire had gotten lost too, or maybe worse. I don't really talk about what happened in the summer of 2012 anymore. It was one of those things I tried to box away and bury, but even now, over a decade later, it comes back when I least expect it. Certain smells, like wet pine or smoke, make it all feel real again. I've had time to think about everything that went wrong, and even now, I'm still not completely sure I made all the right decisions. I've played that week over in my head 1,000 times. I remember every single moment, every step, every sound, every mistake. Back then, I was 27. I lived in Montana, working as a freelance photographer, and I'd spend a lot of time out in the backcountry on solo trips. I didn't really have many close friends or family. I liked being out there alone. There was something peaceful about being away from everything. No cars, no buildings, no phones, just me and the trail. That summer, I planned a solo 5-day hike through the Bitterroot Mountains, just west of a town called Darby. I'd mapped out a loop that would take me deep into the woods, across ridgelines, and back down through a couple valleys. I'd done parts of the trail before, but this time I wanted to connect them and spend a few nights off the beaten path. The route wasn't on any official maps. It was stitched together from Forest Service roads, overgrown game trails, and some routes I'd found online from other hikers. Not illegal or anything, just remote. I left on a Tuesday morning in late July. The heat was brutal even before noon. My pack was heavy with food, water, camera gear, and a basic camp setup. I carried a paper topo map, a compass, and a Garmin GPS with limited battery life. I knew better than to rely on just electronics out there. I also had a satellite emergency beacon, though I hoped I'd never need it. The first day was pretty straightforward. I parked my car off a gravel Forest Service road near Trapper Peak, locked everything up, and left a note in the windshield with the date I'd be back, Sunday. I even emailed a copy of my route to myself and a cousin just in case. By mid-afternoon, I was deep into the woods. Thick stands of lodgepole pines surrounded me, the air warm and still. Occasionally, I'd hear a woodpecker or see a deer dart through the trees. Nothing unusual. The first night, I camped by a small stream, ate freeze-dried pasta, filtered some water, and stretched out in my bivy sack under the stars. I remember thinking how peaceful it all was. I even took a long exposure photo of the Milky Way. That photo's still on my hard drive today. Sometimes I stare at it longer than I should. The second day started with a steep climb. I followed a rocky ridgeline for a few miles, and by noon I'd passed the last marked trail on my map. Everything ahead of me was off-grid. No blazes, no signs, just a dotted line I'd drawn with a pencil. That's how I liked it. By late afternoon, I was maybe 15 miles from the nearest road. I'd planned to camp near a small alpine lake, but when I got there, the water was low and the shoreline was thick with mosquitoes. So I pushed another mile and set up camp on a flat stretch of high ground. That night, something felt off. I wasn't scared, not yet, but I couldn't fall asleep. The woods felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that presses on your ears. Around midnight, I thought I heard something move through the brush not far from camp. It wasn't loud, just a faint crack of twigs or a soft shuffle. Could have been a deer, maybe an elk, but it made my skin crawl. I didn't have a campfire going, just my headlamp, so I clicked it off and lay there frozen in my bivvy. I didn't hear anything else for a while. Eventually, I must have dozed off. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. My breath fogged in the air. It had gotten cold overnight. I boiled water for coffee and packed up quickly. I wanted to move. I didn't like how that area felt. My plan was to drop into a valley, then climb back up to a ridge that would take me southeast. The terrain started getting tougher. The trail was basically gone, just faint signs of game paths. My GPS worked, but I only turned it on sparingly to save power. Around midday, I was making my way down a steep slope when I slipped. Not a big fall, just lost my footing on some loose gravel. I landed hard on my left wrist, and my knee smacked a rock. I cursed, sat there for a while, and checked myself over. The wrist was sore but not broken. The knee was bleeding, but I wrapped it with a clean shirt and kept going. It was about 2 hours later when I realized I was off course. Not by much at first, just a few hundred yards, but the trees were thick and the ground uneven. Every time I checked my compass, I felt like I drifted further south than I should have. I tried to backtrack to a rock outcropping I remembered from earlier, but I couldn't find it. That's when it started to hit me. I was lost. I didn't panic right away. I'd been in tight spots before. I sat down, drank some water, and studied the map. If I could find the stream that ran through the valley, I could follow it northeast until it crossed a marked trail. That was the plan. But the map was old. The stream bed I finally found was dry, just rocks and dust. By late afternoon, I still hadn't found the trail. I was tired, my knee ached, and the forest felt thicker than ever. I set up camp in a small clearing, ate some jerky and trail mix, and lay down early. I barely slept. The fourth day is when everything went to hell. Started with sounds distant at first. Sharp cracks like branches snapping underfoot. I'd stop walking and it would stop too. I told myself it was nothing, probably just animals. But by late morning, I knew something was wrong. I came across an old fire ring, long abandoned. Blackened stones, rusted cans, even a broken tent pole. It didn't look fresh, but it didn't look ancient either. I took some photos, made a waypoint on my GPS, and moved on. Then I found the shirt. It was hanging from a low branch, faded red, torn in 2 places, just hanging there like someone left it on purpose. I stood there staring at it for a long time. I didn't touch it, just turned and kept walking faster now. Every instinct told me to get away. By the time I realized I was circling back toward the same clearing from the night before, I was drenched in sweat. I dropped my pack and sat down, trying not to freak out. My mind raced. I hadn't seen another person in days. No footprints, no camps, nothing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there, watching me, following me. I turned on my GPS. The battery icon flashed red. 15% left. I checked the beacon next. Still working. I hovered my finger over the SOS button for a long time but didn't press it. Not yet. I wasn't injured badly. I wasn't dying. Not yet. I made a new plan, head due east. No matter what, just keep going until I hit something. A road, a trail, anything. I packed up and started moving. It was almost dusk when I spotted the figure. Far down the ridge, maybe 100 yards ahead. Just for a second. Between the trees. A tall shape. Could have been a man. Could have been my eyes playing tricks on me. But when I moved forward and looked again, there was nothing there. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with my back to a tree, headlamp off, knife in hand. Every sound made my heart race. Leaves rustling, wind shifting, branches creaking. I never saw anyone again that night, but I could feel it. Something wasn't right. The 5th morning, I was a mess. I'd barely eaten. My water was low. My knee was swollen. I moved like a zombie, just kept walking. East, always east. Sometime in the early afternoon, I found the boot print. Not mine. It was fresh. In the mud, deep heel strike, wide toe box, hiking boot, size 12 maybe. Not mine, and it was facing toward me. I froze. The forest was dead silent again. I scanned the trees, but nothing moved. I backtracked, then cut northeast through a gully. I pushed through thick brush until I hit an old logging road, barely visible under all the growth. I followed it uphill, praying it led somewhere. It did. By evening, I found a Forest Service cabin. Boarded up, locked, but the porch gave me shelter. I collapsed there, drinking the last of my water, trying to get a GPS signal. Nothing. I knew I wasn't far from safety now, but I didn't have anything left. My legs were rubber. My head pounded. I lay down and passed out. When I woke, it was dark. Real dark. No stars. No moon. And I heard something moving outside the tree-line. A slow, steady crunch of leaves. Not an animal. Not running. Just walking. Deliberate. Heavy. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I lay there on the porch, heart pounding in my chest. The footsteps stopped after a while. I waited until dawn, then moved fast, picked a direction and went. 3 hours later, I found the road. An actual road. Gravel. Tire tracks. I cried when I saw it. I followed it down for miles until a pickup. It was September 2018, and I had just turned 34. I had been working nonstop in a small accounting firm in Denver and hadn't taken a real break in over a year. Between long hours at the desk and too much time looking at screens, I needed to get away from everything. I didn't want a city or a crowded tourist spot. I didn't want hotels or guided tours. I wanted silence, space, and something real. So I chose to hike alone in the Medicine Bow Mountains in southern Wyoming. I'd done solo hikes before, mostly short weekend trips in Colorado. I wasn't new to the backcountry, but I wasn't an expert either. Still, I felt confident enough. I had a decent level of fitness, I was comfortable reading topographical maps, and I was usually good at keeping calm under pressure. That kind of thinking is dangerous, though. Confidence can turn into carelessness when you let it grow too much. I chose a 3-day loop trail I found online. It was about 28 miles, starting near Lake Marie and winding up into the more remote areas of the forest before looping back around. I figured it would be a peaceful, quiet trip. No real challenges other than sore legs and maybe some cold nights. The forecast said low 60s during the day and high 30s at night. Clear skies, no storms, and low wind. I left early Friday morning. The drive was smooth, about 4 hours from Denver to the trailhead. I stopped for gas and a sandwich just outside Laramie, then kept going until I reached the start point. There were only a couple of cars in the gravel lot, which made me feel good. It meant I'd have most of the trail to myself. I parked, locked the car, and set off with my pack, which weighed around 35 pounds. Tent, sleeping bag, food, water filter, bear spray, GPS, map, compass, headlamp, all the usual gear. I had 3 days worth of food and water, plus an extra day's worth of protein bars, just in case. The trail started smooth and wide. For the first hour, I passed through open pine forest, the ground soft with fallen needles. A few squirrels darted through the underbrush, and the air was cool and dry. I had a light fleece on over my shirt, but even that started to feel warm after a couple miles. I tied it around my waist and kept going. By noon, I reached a small meadow with a stream running through it. I sat on a flat rock, filled my bottle using my filter, and had some dried fruit and jerky. I hadn't seen anyone else so far, and it felt like I had the whole mountain to myself. Around 1:30, I continued hiking deeper into the woods. The trail narrowed, climbing gradually over rocky switchbacks. My legs started to feel it, but I was still in good spirits. By late afternoon, I had made it about 10 miles in. I found a flat clearing just below tree line and decided to set up camp. There was a half-rotted log nearby that worked well as a bench, and the ground was soft but dry. I set up my tent, boiled some water for a freeze-dried meal, and ate slowly as the light dimmed. The sunset over the mountains turned the trees orange, then purple, then black. I zipped myself into the tent around 8:30, read for a while on my Kindle, then turned off the light and drifted off. Sometime around midnight, I woke up. It wasn't a noise that got me up. It was a feeling, that kind of vague unease that slips into your chest when something's not right. I stayed still and listened. For a while, there was nothing, just the distant sound of wind moving through the trees and maybe some branches creaking. I started to think I was just being paranoid. Then I heard it. Crunch. It was a slow, deliberate step, not an animal moving quickly through the woods, more like someone placing a foot down and shifting their weight. Then another crunch, and another. I held my breath. I had my bear spray beside me and a small fixed-blade knife. I sat up slowly, unzipped the tent just a couple inches, and peered out. It was dark, but there was a nearly full moon, and the trees cast long shadows. I couldn't see anyone, just the trees and some rocks. The noise had stopped. I waited. My heart was pounding. For a while, there was nothing but silence. Eventually, I convinced myself it had just been a deer or maybe a small bear passing by. I lay back down, though I didn't really sleep for the rest of the night. I just lay there with the knife in my hand and my ears straining. In the morning, I stepped out and checked around the camp. No tracks, no broken branches. Nothing to say anyone had been nearby. I packed up and moved on, feeling a little better in the daylight. The trail on the second day took me up to a high ridge, well above the tree line. The wind was colder up there, and the trail was mostly rock. The view was stunning, miles of untouched wilderness in every direction. No houses, no roads, just endless peaks and forest. I hiked about 10 more miles that day, stopping now and then to filter water or eat a snack. Around 4 p.m., I started looking for a place to camp. I found a small bowl-shaped area surrounded by rocks and some twisted trees. It offered a bit of protection from the wind and was close to a small pond. I set up camp, made dinner, and tried to shake off the nerves from the night before. It had to be an animal, I told myself. Nothing else made sense. But again, I woke up in the middle of the night. This time, I didn't hear footsteps. It was quieter, too quiet. No wind, no crickets, no movement, just dead still. I sat up again and listened, and then I saw something. On the edge of the clearing, maybe 30 feet away, was a figure. It was hard to make out in the moonlight, but it was a human shape. Tall, thin, standing perfectly still. I didn't move. I just watched. My heart felt like it was going to punch through my ribs. The figure didn't move either. I don't know how long I sat there. Maybe 5 minutes, maybe 30. But eventually, the figure turned and walked back into the trees, without a sound. I didn't sleep at all after that. I sat up with the knife in my hand, watching the tree line until the sun came up. When it was light enough, I packed up fast and got back on the trail. I didn't eat. I didn't stop for water. I just wanted out. I still had about 8 miles left to finish the loop. I planned to move fast and be back at the car by early afternoon. I checked my GPS every 10 minutes. The trail twisted through thick forest, with dense undergrowth and huge mossy boulders. I kept glancing over my shoulder, and every snapped twig made me flinch. My breathing was shallow. My legs were sore, but adrenaline kept me moving. About 2 miles from the trailhead, I started to smell something strange. It was faint but sharp, like old metal and rotting meat. I slowed down and scanned the woods. About 20 yards off the trail, I saw something hanging from a tree. I stepped closer, cautiously, and felt my stomach drop. It was a deer, or it had been. Its body was strung up by its hind legs, skinned, and gutted, but not cleanly. It looked hacked apart like someone had done it fast and without skill. The carcass was swinging slightly in the breeze. I backed away, almost stumbling. This wasn't a hunter's work. Hunters don't leave game like that, and they sure as hell don't hang it 10 feet off the ground. I started running. Branches whipped my arms, and roots nearly tripped me. I didn't care. I just ran, blindly, with the GPS screen bouncing in my hand. When I reached the trailhead, my car was still there. No other vehicles in the lot. I fumbled with the keys, threw my pack in the back, and got in. I locked the doors, turned the engine, and sat there shaking. I drove straight back to Denver. I didn't stop for food. I didn't stop for gas until the tank was nearly empty. I didn't feel safe until I was back inside my apartment with the door locked and the blinds shut. For a few days, I didn't tell anyone what happened. I kept thinking maybe I imagined it or that I was overreacting. But I knew what I saw. I knew someone had been out there watching. I knew the figure wasn't an animal. I knew the deer didn't hang itself. I finally told a coworker who had done a lot of backcountry hiking. He went quiet when I described the carcass. He said there had been reports over the past couple years, weird stuff in that area. Campsites trashed, missing pets, strange structures made of bones and branches. Nothing confirmed. Nothing in the news. I didn't report it to the police. I should have, maybe, but what would I say? A man stood still and watched me at night? A deer was butchered in the woods? I had no proof, no photos, just fear. Since then, I haven't gone hiking alone. I still go out sometimes, but only with others, and never deep into remote places. I stick to state parks, crowded trails, anywhere with people nearby. I still think about that figure, about the way it stood there totally still, about the silence, about the smell. Whoever was out there wasn't just camping or hunting. They were waiting, watching. I think if I'd stayed another night, I wouldn't have come back. It was late September 2019 when I decided to take a short solo hiking trip through a remote part of Montana. I was 34 at the time, working a desk job in Missoula, and honestly just burnt out. I had spent the last several months watching spreadsheets and emails eat away at my mind, and I badly needed to clear my head. So I took a few days off, packed my gear, and planned a 2-day solo hike through an area called Deep Ridge Trail, which runs near the Bitterroot Mountains, about 3 hours southwest of town. The trail wasn't popular, not listed in most guides, and that was part of the draw. I didn't want crowded switchbacks or passing families with dogs. I wanted quiet, trees, wind, the sound of birds in the morning, the kind of reset you can only get by being completely alone. I'd hiked alone before, and I was confident with my gear. I knew the safety rules. I told a coworker about my plans and gave them the location. I charged my GPS beacon, loaded up with water, bear spray, a knife, and a satellite phone, though the reception in those areas was usually garbage. I parked my truck near a Forest Service road at the start of the trail early on a Thursday morning. The sky was overcast, the air had that clean, damp smell that only comes from recent rain, and the temperature was perfect, mid-50s. My plan was to hike in about 12 miles, camp overnight near an alpine meadow I had read about online, and then hike out the next day. I wasn't in a rush, so I took my time, snapping a few pictures along the way, breathing in that deep forest silence. The trail was narrow and often hard to follow. I had a printed topographic map in case the GPS didn't hold up. The first few miles passed quietly, just me and the soft crunch of boots on the damp dirt. I saw some deer, squirrels, and a small black bear far in the distance that didn't seem interested in me. By noon, I had covered maybe 6 miles. Around 3, I was well past the 10-mile mark and reached a bend in the trail that opened into a thin, sloping ridge. I rested there for a while, sitting on a flat rock overlooking the trees below. It was peaceful, so quiet you could hear your own blood in your ears. By late afternoon, I found a clearing flat enough to pitch my tent. It was close to the edge of the tree line and gave me a view of the far-off peaks, which were already starting to get a light dusting of snow. I boiled water for a dehydrated meal, ate slowly while watching the sun dip down behind the hills, and then packed everything up tight. I stored my food bag about 40 yards away in a tree to keep bears away from the tent and crawled into my sleeping bag just as it got fully dark. The night was cold, colder than I expected for that time of year. I woke up around 2 a.m. needing to pee and stepped outside the tent, teeth chattering. The stars were incredible, the kind of view you only get when you're far from any lights. After taking care of things, I stood there for a while just listening. The trees creaked slightly in the wind, and I could hear an owl in the distance. No other sounds. It was calm. But then, just as I was turning to get back into the tent, I heard something. A short, distinct crack like a stick snapping. I froze, listened. Another one, maybe 20 yards into the trees. I pulled out my flashlight and swept it slowly across the area where I thought the noise came from. Nothing, just trees. I waited another minute or two, but the sound didn't come back. Probably just a deer moving through, I told myself. Still, I kept the flashlight next to me in the sleeping bag for the rest of the night. I didn't sleep much after that. When the sun finally came up, I packed up quickly and decided to skip breakfast. I didn't want to hang around any longer than I needed to. As I got everything together, I noticed something weird just off the edge of the clearing. A boot print, not mine. Too large, maybe a size 12. The tread was different, too. I wear Merrells, these looked more like work boots. I stared at it for a long time. There were no other boot prints around. Just that one, pointing toward where I had hung my food bag. I kept looking, trying to see if maybe it was part of an old set of tracks, but it was too clean, too fresh looking. The edges hadn't been softened by wind or weather. It hadn't rained the night before, so whatever made it had done so recently. I tried to tell myself it could have been a hunter passing through. Maybe someone just checking trail cameras or scouting early. But I hadn't seen any sign of other hikers, no wrappers, no trash, no footprints on the way up. And this trail wasn't well known. I started walking fast, sticking to the trail and checking behind me every few minutes. I didn't stop for water or food until I was at least 5 miles down. Every squirrel or branch that snapped made me jump. My skin was crawling the whole time, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone out there. By early afternoon, I was maybe 2 miles from the trailhead when I came around a bend and saw something that stopped me cold. There was a tree about 10 feet off the trail, maybe 15 inches thick. Nailed into it at about chest height was a metal sign. It wasn't a Forest Service sign. It was rusted and crooked with faded red paint. The words were barely legible, but I could still read them. Private land. Do not enter. Trespassers will be shot. That made no sense. I had studied the maps carefully. This area was public forest land, no private properties for miles. But someone had gone through the effort of hauling that sign out here and putting it up, and it didn't look old enough to be some leftover relic. That's when I noticed the tree next to it had something else. A length of rusty barbed wire wrapped around it, like a makeshift fence that didn't go anywhere. It stretched maybe 10 feet before disappearing into the trees. The more I looked, the more I noticed. Another tree, another coil of barbed wire. It wasn't a fence. It was like someone had put these things up deliberately to make people think they were on private land. Maybe to scare people off, or keep people from exploring too far off trail. I started moving again, faster now. I kept my bear spray in one hand and my knife on my belt. The trail started feeling tighter, more overgrown, like it hadn't been used in a long time. I had to duck under fallen branches that hadn't been cleared. About a mile later, I saw something else. Something that almost made me throw up. Hanging from a low tree branch was an animal. A raccoon. But not just dead. Gutted. Strung up by the legs. Its belly opened wide like a hunting display. Except no one hunts raccoons out here. And no one leaves them hanging like that. The worst part was how fresh it looked. Blood still dripping onto the dirt. The smell made me gag. It hadn't been there the day before. I backed away slowly, then turned and started jogging. I was exhausted from the hike, but adrenaline kept me moving. I could feel something behind me, like eyes on the back of my neck, but I didn't turn around. I just kept pushing forward. Finally, I saw the clearing where I had parked my truck. My heart was pounding, lungs burning. But when I reached it, I stopped again. The truck was there, but the driver's side door was cracked open. I never leave it unlocked, let alone open. I crept up slowly, heart hammering. The interior had been ransacked, glove box torn open, gear tossed around. My emergency radio was missing. The registration papers were gone. A hunting knife I kept under the seat was missing too. There were no tire tracks nearby. No sign of another vehicle. Whoever had been here either came on foot or had left earlier that morning. I slammed the door shut, locked everything, started the engine, and tore down that service road faster than I should have. Every bump made the tires skid, but I didn't care. I just wanted out. I didn't stop until I hit the main road and drove straight into the next town, about 40 minutes away. I parked at a gas station, went inside, and just sat there in the bathroom for a long time, shaking. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw how pale I was. I had dirt all over me, my eyes were red, and my hands wouldn't stop trembling. I didn't go to the police right away. I wasn't even sure what I'd say. There were no bodies, no attack, nothing I could really prove. Just signs, warnings, a sick feeling that if I'd stayed one more night out there, I might not have made it out. Eventually, I did file a report with the Forest Service. Told them about the barbed wire, the sign, and the dead raccoon. They said they'd send someone to check it out. I never heard anything else about it. I don't go hiking alone anymore. Even now, years later, I still think about that boot print. The one facing toward my food bag, like someone had stood there in the dark, watching my tent. Maybe just observing, maybe waiting for something. Whatever was going on out there, it wasn't natural or mystical. It was real. It was human, and that's what makes it so much worse. In the late summer of 2003, when I was 28 years old, I decided to take a solo hiking trip in the Cascade Mountains in Washington state. I had been an avid hiker for years, but mostly stuck to well-marked trails and popular spots. This time, though, I wanted something different, something more remote, more challenging. I packed my gear carefully. A sturdy backpack, enough food and water for a week, a reliable compass, a GPS device, first aid supplies, and a small tent. I had my camera, a notebook, and a headlamp. I double-checked everything before leaving my small apartment in Seattle early one morning. The plan was to hike deep into the wilderness, away from any established trails, and camp in places few others ever saw. I wanted silence, solitude, and the chance to push my limits. The weather forecast was clear and warm, and the maps suggested a network of old logging roads and overgrown paths that I could follow. I told no one the exact details of where I was going, only that I'd be out for about 7 days. The first 2 days went as expected. The forest was dense with towering Douglas firs and thick underbrush. The ground beneath my boots was soft with fallen pine needles, and the air smelled of moss and damp earth. I made good time, crossing several small streams and spotting deer and the occasional bald eagle soaring overhead. Nights were cold but bearable. I'd built small fires to keep warm and cooked simple meals from my backpack. I felt completely free, connected to nature in a way I hadn't before. On the third day, I veered off the marked paths onto a narrow ridge trail I'd found on an old topographic map. The trail was rough and barely visible, overgrown with ferns and thorny bushes. I moved carefully, aware that the terrain was steep and uneven. The ridge offered stunning views of the valleys below and the snow-capped peaks in the distance. I stopped several times to take photos and jot down notes about the landscape. As the afternoon wore on, the weather began to change. Thick clouds rolled in from the west, and the wind picked up, rustling the branches overhead. I could smell the faint scent of rain, but it was still several miles back to any reliable shelter. I pressed on, hoping to reach a small abandoned fire lookout tower marked on the map before nightfall. By late afternoon, the trail became more difficult. The ground was slippery from recent rain, and the fog had started to creep in, cutting visibility to just a few feet. The trees around me seemed to close in, their dark trunks looming like silent sentinels. I felt a growing unease, but tried to focus on putting one foot in front of the other. Then I noticed something odd. The usual sounds of the forest, the chirping birds, rustling leaves, and distant animal calls, had all but vanished. The only noise was the faint whistle of the wind. The silence was unnatural, heavy, and oppressive. I paused, scanning the foggy forest, but saw nothing unusual. Still, the feeling lingered. Suddenly, my foot caught on a hidden root, and I stumbled, twisting my ankle sharply. Pain shot through my leg, and I fell hard onto the wet ground. I sat there for a moment, trying to assess the damage. The ankle was swollen and throbbing, but I could still move my foot slightly. I knew I couldn't put much weight on it, though. Panic began to rise in my chest. I tried to stand, leaning heavily on my hiking pole, but the pain was too great. I realized I would have to stop and rest, maybe even spend the night right there if I couldn't get moving. The fog thickened, and the daylight dimmed rapidly. I dug out my phone, hoping for a signal to call for help. No luck. The screen showed no service. I forced myself to take deep breaths and remain calm. I set up my tent in a small clearing nearby, though the wet ground made it difficult. I crawled inside, wrapped my ankle as best as I could with a bandage from my first aid kit, and tried to keep warm. I knew hypothermia was a risk. That night, every little noise startled me. Twigs snapping, leaves crunching. My imagination turned every sound into something sinister. I stayed awake for hours, listening to the wind moan through the trees and watching the fog swirl outside my tent. Sleep came only in short, uneasy bursts. The next morning, I hoped the ankle would feel better, but it was still swollen and painful. I ate a small breakfast, drank water, and debated what to do. Going back the way I came was risky. The trail was steep, slippery, and I wasn't sure if I could make it. Heading forward toward the lookout tower was about 5 miles away, but I had no idea what condition the trail might be in. I chose to move forward, using my hiking poles and carefully putting as little weight on my ankle as possible. The fog still hung low, making navigation difficult. My GPS showed the general direction, but the dense forest obscured landmarks. As I walked, I kept hearing sounds. Branches snapping off in the distance, twigs breaking underfoot. Not all of it could be animals. I felt like something was watching me, though I saw nothing. I tried to tell myself it was just nerves. Hours later, the trail suddenly ended. I stumbled onto an old logging road, overgrown with brush and fallen trees. I recognized the path from my map. It was supposed to lead directly to the lookout tower. Relief washed over me, but it was mixed with frustration at how slow I was moving. I followed the road, which twisted through the forest, eventually reaching a small clearing where I saw the lookout tower. It was an old wooden structure, weathered and cracked but still standing. I felt a strange mix of hope and unease. The tower looked abandoned, but it promised shelter. I approached and climbed the rusted metal ladder to the top platform. Inside was a small room with broken windows and a thin layer of dust. I set my pack down and inspected the place. It was dry and sheltered from the wind, so I decided to spend the night there. I barricaded the door as best as I could with some loose boards I found, set up my sleeping bag, and tried to rest. That night was worse than the last. The wind howled around the tower, making it creak and groan. The fog had turned into a steady rain that hammered the thin roof. From the darkness outside, I heard distant noises, something large moving through the forest, breaking branches. At times, the noises felt uncomfortably close. I tried to stay calm and rationalize it. Maybe it was just a deer or elk, or a bear searching for food. I thought about the warnings I had read about wildlife in the Cascades. Bears, cougars, even wolves occasionally. But I had never seen or heard anything so close before. In the early hours of the morning, I was jolted awake by a loud crash against the tower. Something hit the side hard enough to shake the whole structure. My heart pounded in my chest as I grabbed my flashlight and shone it into the darkness. I could see nothing but swirling fog and rain. I tried to make noise, banging on the walls with a stick, hoping to scare whatever it was away. But the noises continued, heavy footsteps circling the tower, scraping against the wood. My mind raced, imagining worst-case scenarios. Eventually, the noises faded, and I stayed awake, trembling, until the first light of dawn. When I finally crawled out of the tower, the rain had stopped, and the fog was lifting. I took a deep breath of the cold morning air and scanned the surrounding forest. What I saw made my blood run cold. Several deep scratches were gouged into the wood of the tower, long, ragged, and fresh. Near the base, large paw prints were pressed into the mud, unmistakably those of a bear. The prints led away into the forest. I packed my things quickly, my ankle throbbing with every movement, and decided I had to get out as fast as possible. Moving slowly but steadily, I retraced my steps along the logging road and the ridge trail, using the GPS to navigate through patches where the fog still lingered. By late afternoon, after hours of painful walking, I finally reached a well-marked trail leading to a ranger station. Exhausted and relieved, I used their phone to call for help and arranged for a friend to pick me up from the trailhead the next day. The entire experience stayed with me long after I recovered. The feeling of being watched, the isolation, the danger lurking in the wild, it was a reminder of how unpredictable nature could be. I never took the wilderness lightly again. Even now, years later, I sometimes wonder what exactly had circled that tower in the dark. I never saw it clearly, but the evidence left behind was undeniable. It wasn't a ghost or anything supernatural, just a wild animal asserting its territory in a remote part of the forest. That hike taught me respect for the land, for the animals, and for the limits of my own body and mind. It was a harsh lesson in survival and humility. I still hike, but I never forget that day when the wilderness was silent and watching, and I was alone, vulnerable, and very small in the face of it all. The year was 2019, late October, when I decided to do a solo hike in the rugged mountains of the Cascades in Washington state. I was 32 years old and had been hiking for years, usually with friends or small groups, but something about this trip felt different. I wanted to push myself, go deeper into the wild than I had before. I wasn't inexperienced, but this trail was known to be tough. I told no one about my plans except my sister, who I texted once before leaving. I promised I'd check in every day, but I had no set itinerary or exact return time. The trailhead was at a small parking lot near a forgotten logging road. The cold air was sharp and fresh, and the trees around were a mix of tall Douglas firs and yellowing maples. The crunch of dry leaves under my boots was the only sound as I adjusted my backpack, checking my gear one last time. The day was crisp but clear. I had enough food, water, and survival tools, but I kept my pack light. A map, compass, headlamp, fire starter, knife, first aid kit, and extra layers were all carefully packed. I felt ready. I stepped onto the trail, feeling a familiar mix of excitement and calm. The trail wound steeply upward, through dense forest, over roots and rocks slick with fallen leaves. The mountain air smelled earthy and pine-scented. The sky was a pale blue with wisps of clouds. As I walked, I noticed signs of wildlife, scratches on tree trunks, scat, footprints in the mud. I tried to spot a deer or a squirrel, but the forest was mostly quiet. The sun was bright, but the canopy cast shifting shadows. My breathing was steady, the rhythm of my steps matched by the occasional calls of distant birds. About 3 hours in, I reached a small clearing near a creek. The sound of rushing water was a relief, and I knelt to refill my water bottle from the stream, filtering carefully. My legs were tired but strong. I took a break, eating some trail mix, and checked my map. According to the map, the trail continued past the creek, climbing steeply again towards a ridge that offered views of the surrounding valleys. That was my goal for the day: reach the ridge, camp, and enjoy the sunset. I packed up and headed on, following the narrow path as it zigzagged up the slope. The forest grew thicker and darker under the canopy. The temperature dropped, and the light dimmed as clouds moved in. I pulled on my jacket and quickened my pace. After another hour, the trail became slippery with wet leaves and mud. My boots slipped a couple of times, but I caught myself. The trees felt close, almost closing in. I noticed something odd, a faint smell, like burnt wood, but no smoke or fire in sight. I shrugged it off. Maybe someone had camped nearby recently. The trail then split at a fork. I checked the map, but the markings were faint. Both paths looked overgrown and scarcely traveled. I chose the left fork, reasoning it looked better maintained. The trail narrowed further, and soon the forest grew eerily silent. No birds, no rustling. My steps echoed softly. Then I saw something on the ground, a tattered piece of fabric, maybe a piece of clothing or a bag. It was wet and dirty, half buried under leaves. I picked it up briefly, my heart rate quickening. It was dark green like a jacket. Why was it here? I put it in my pack, thinking I'd ask the rangers if it was reported lost later. As I walked, I began to notice that the trail was becoming less clear. Small branches and twigs blocked the way in places. The further I went, the harder it was to tell if I was on the right path. My compass needle seemed to jitter, but that was probably nothing. At this point, the sky had darkened and the clouds thickened. It was going to rain soon. I debated whether to turn back, but I still felt strong. I decided to push forward, but carefully. Suddenly, I heard a faint sound. It was difficult to identify at first, but it sounded like footsteps. Slow, heavy, on dry leaves. Not my own and not nearby animals. My heart jumped. I stopped walking and listened. The sound ceased. Maybe my imagination. I moved cautiously, staying alert. Every crack of a twig or rustle of leaves made me tense. My breath came faster, but I forced myself to stay calm. After another half hour, the trail opened up onto a narrow ridge. The trees thinned, and the wind picked up sharply, cold and biting. The rain started in fine drops. I pulled on my rain jacket and scanned the horizon. The valley below was shrouded in mist. I set up camp quickly, pitching my tent near some rocks that would shield me from the wind. The rain grew heavier, pattering on the tent's fabric. I made a small fire, careful to keep it contained. The warm light was comforting. I ate a simple meal and settled in for the night, listening to the rain and the occasional distant thunder. Sleep was uneasy. The silence around me felt too deep, unnatural. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to a faint noise outside the tent. My heart pounded. It was a low, slow crunching, like footsteps on wet leaves. I stayed perfectly still, gripping my knife. The sound circled my tent, slow and deliberate. I wanted to believe it was an animal, maybe a deer or a bear, but the noise didn't sound right. Too heavy, too careful. Then I heard another sound, a low grunt or growl, not quite animal. I was frozen, too scared to move. The footsteps stopped. The silence returned. I waited until dawn, heart racing. When the sky lightened, I carefully unzipped the tent and looked around. The ground was disturbed, and there were several footprints in the mud, large and heavy, unlike any animal I knew. I packed up quickly, my hands shaking. I didn't want to stay another minute. I took the quickest route back, retracing my steps, but the trail was harder to find. The rain had washed away some markers. I kept to the compass and map as best I could. The forest was dense and the ground slippery. I moved fast but carefully. After hours of hiking, exhaustion creeping in, I reached the creek again, recognizing the sounds of rushing water. Relief flooded me. I followed the trail downhill and, finally, after what felt like forever, reached the parking lot where my car was parked. I locked the doors and sat inside, breathing hard, cold sweat on my skin. I called my sister and told her I was safe, but I didn't mention the footprints or the noises. I couldn't explain what I had experienced, and I wasn't sure I wanted to think about it more. That night, I lay awake in my bed, staring at the ceiling. I thought about the footsteps, the growl, the fabric I found. I never reported it, fearing no one would believe me. But sometimes, when the wind rustles outside, I think about that night, alone in the silent forest, and wonder what was really out there watching. It was the summer of 2013 when I decided to hike the rugged trails of the Klamath Mountains in Northern California. I was 27 years old, in decent shape, and had been hiking a few times before, but nothing like this trip. I wanted a challenge, something remote, away from crowds, where I could clear my head and spend some time with nature. The Klamath Range is known for its thick forests, steep hills, and unpredictably wild terrain. I chose a trail that was supposed to be about 30 miles round trip, leading to a small lake far up in the mountains. The plan was to hike in early morning, camp overnight by the lake, and hike back the next day. I packed my gear carefully. A lightweight tent, sleeping bag, water filter, enough food for 2 days, a first aid kit, and my trusty compass and map. My phone had no signal there, so I knew I was on my own. I had told a friend my plan and when I expected to be back, just as a precaution. The first few hours were as expected. The trail was narrow and rocky, shaded by towering pines and firs, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and pine needles. The forest was alive with the sound of birds, insects buzzing, and the distant rustle of small animals moving through undergrowth. I walked steadily, careful to watch my footing on the uneven ground. The trail climbed gradually, and every now and then I stopped to drink water or take a bite from my sandwich. Around noon, the trail began to steepen. The trees thinned out slightly, revealing patches of blue sky. The temperature rose as I gained elevation, the sun beating down through the branches. I stopped for a break on a large flat rock, sweating more than I had anticipated. I refilled my water bottle from a small stream nearby and ate some trail mix, trying to stay hydrated. After about 5 hours of hiking, I reached the edge of the lake just as the sun began to dip toward the west. The lake was smaller than I expected, a quiet, still pool surrounded by thick forest and a few scattered boulders. The surface of the water reflected the colors of the sunset, orange and pink streaking the sky. I set up my tent near the shore, careful to stay a little higher than the waterline. There was no one else around, just the occasional splash of a fish or the soft croak of frogs. I cooked a simple dinner on my small camp stove, dehydrated pasta, and drank the last of my water. The night came quickly in the mountains. Soon, the sky darkened and stars appeared, brilliant and sharp against the black canvas above. The temperature dropped sharply, and I zipped up my sleeping bag, trying to stay warm. It was around midnight when I first noticed it. A faint sound, almost like footsteps, crunching leaves just beyond my tent. I froze, listening. The forest was supposed to be quiet except for the usual wildlife, but this felt different. The footsteps moved slowly, irregularly. I told myself it was probably an animal, a deer or maybe a bear moving through the underbrush. Still, the sound unsettled me. I reached for my flashlight and shined the beam outside the tent, but saw nothing but dark shadows and the glint of moonlight on the leaves. The footsteps stopped. I waited a long time, but no more sounds came. Eventually, exhaustion won, and I drifted back to sleep. Morning came cold and gray. I packed my things and planned to leave early. The sound from the night before lingered in my mind, but I told myself not to worry. It was probably just a wandering animal, and I was deep in wilderness after all. About 2 hours into the hike back, the trail took a sudden turn near a ridge, and I paused to look down into the valley below. The forest stretched endlessly, a patchwork of green and shadow. Suddenly, I heard it again, that faint crunching, this time closer. I stopped walking and looked around, heart pounding. The sound was definitely footsteps, slow and deliberate, not like any animal I had heard before. I started walking again, faster now, eyes scanning the tree line. There was no one in sight. I convinced myself it was another hiker somewhere off trail, or maybe a hunter. Still, I didn't feel safe. After another half hour, I noticed the trail was getting narrower, overgrown in places like it hadn't been maintained. I checked my map and compass. I was still on course, but heading into less familiar terrain. My stomach twisted. I kept moving, but now the footsteps were behind me, keeping pace. I dared not turn around. The woods grew darker as the canopy thickened, even though it was still morning. The trail was becoming treacherous, loose rocks, slippery moss, fallen logs. I slipped once and caught myself, heart racing. I didn't want to be injured out here. At one point, I found a small clearing and decided to rest for a minute. I sat on a rock, breathing hard, trying to steady my nerves. The footsteps had stopped again. Maybe whoever or whatever had been following me had given up. I took a sip of water and tried to calm myself, focusing on the map to find the quickest way back. But when I looked up, something moved just beyond the edge of the clearing, a dark figure slipping between the trees. It wasn't an animal. My blood turned cold. I jumped up and started running, heart pounding, breath coming fast. The trail disappeared beneath my feet as I pushed through brush and brambles. The footsteps behind me accelerated. I didn't dare look back. I ran for what felt like miles, the forest blurring around me. My legs burned, my lungs ached. The sound of footsteps grew louder, closer. Then, I tripped over a root and fell hard onto the dirt. Pain exploded in my knee. I scrambled to get up, but the figure was already there, just on the edge of the clearing. I froze, not knowing what to do. The figure didn't rush me, just stood and watched. I could see a rifle slung across their back and a hunting knife hanging from their belt. I had no weapon, no way to defend myself. For a moment, it seemed like time stopped. Then the figure stepped forward, low and slow, speaking nothing, just the sound of leaves crunching underfoot. I looked around desperately for a way out. Suddenly, a loud shout echoed from the other side of the trees, and the figure froze. Another person appeared, running toward us with a rifle raised. The dark figure hesitated and then vanished back into the forest. The second person approached me quickly, concerned but silent. They helped me to my feet, checked my knee, and gave me water. They said there had been reports of poachers in the area, dangerous people who were illegally hunting wildlife and anyone who got too close. They had been searching for them all day. I stayed with the second person until help arrived. Rangers escorted me safely back to the trailhead hours later, where I was reunited with my worried friend. The authorities launched a search for the poachers, and some were caught months later, but the memory of that day stayed with me. The fear of being stalked, alone in the wilderness by someone with no rules and no mercy. I never went back to the Klamath Mountains. I still hike, but I always carry extra safety gear, tell someone exactly where I'm going, and never wander off established trails alone. That experience taught me how thin the line is between the peace of nature and danger lurking just beyond the trees. It was the summer of 2014 when I decided to go hiking alone in the Cascade Mountains in Washington state. I was 32 years old then, a little older than most solo hikers I knew, but I had been hiking for years. I'd always liked the quiet, the fresh air, and the way the mountains made me feel like the world was simpler. That summer, I wanted to challenge myself by hiking a route I hadn't done before, a loop around a ridge near Mount Rainier. I'd planned it carefully, checked the maps, the weather reports, packed enough food, water, and gear. I thought I was ready. The first day of the hike was perfect. The trail was steep in places, covered in loose rocks, and thick forest in others. The sun shone through the tall pine trees, casting long shadows over the dirt path. I had my backpack tightly strapped, my boots muddy from the morning's light rain. The air smelled fresh, like pine needles and wet earth. I was alone but never lonely. I was used to silence and enjoyed the slow rhythm of my steps and breath. I took my time, stopped often to drink water and look at the views. The mountain meadows were full of wildflowers, purple lupins, yellow buttercups, and patches of red paintbrush. Birds chirped high in the trees, but otherwise, the only sounds were the crunch of my boots on the trail and the occasional rustle of small animals in the underbrush. By midday, I reached a small clearing overlooking a valley. The view was breathtaking. Far below, a river cut through the green forest like a silver snake. The mountain peaks beyond were still capped with snow. I took a deep breath, feeling the cold air fill my lungs, and sat down on a rock to eat lunch. My pack held a sandwich, a couple of apples, some nuts, and a small bag of trail mix. I munched slowly, savoring the quiet. After lunch, I continued the climb. The trail grew steeper, winding upward through rocky terrain. I paused often, not because I was tired, but to watch a pair of marmots playing near a rock outcrop, and to notice the way the clouds were starting to build up. They were thick and gray now, rolling in quickly from the west. I didn't worry at first. Clouds came and went all the time in the mountains. I knew from experience that weather could change fast up there. Still, by late afternoon, the sky was mostly covered. The wind picked up, rattling the pine trees and sending a chill through the air. I pulled on my rain jacket, zipped it up, and adjusted my pack. I figured I'd make camp soon, maybe near a small lake marked on the map just ahead. It would be safer than hiking in the dark. The rain started as a light drizzle, then quickly became a steady downpour. The trail turned slippery. Mud formed in thick patches, and the rocks glistened wet and dangerous. I slowed down, watching my footing carefully. After about an hour, I reached the lake. It was small but deep, the water dark and still except for the raindrops hitting the surface. The trees surrounding it swayed in the wind. I found a flat spot among the rocks and fallen branches to set up my tent. Setting up the tent in the rain was tricky. My hands were cold and numb by the time I finished. The rain soaked through my jacket despite the waterproof material. I crawled inside the tent, took off my boots and soaked socks, and changed into dry clothes I kept in waterproof bags. I was thankful for the gear I had brought. I boiled water on my small camping stove, drank some tea, and ate a few more nuts. Outside, the rain continued, falling hard against the tent's fabric. I was tired but restless. The wind howled now, bending the pine trees. The lake's surface rippled in the storm, dark waves washing the shore. Couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the hike still ahead of me, the part of the loop that would take me over a high ridge the next day. It was supposed to be the hardest part of the trail, with no trees for shelter and steep cliffs on one side. I hoped the weather would clear by then. Around midnight, the rain stopped suddenly. The wind died down, leaving a strange silence. I unzipped the tent a little and peeked outside. The sky was clear now, filled with stars so bright I'd never seen anything like it before. The Milky Way stretched across the black sky, a shimmering band of light. I felt a deep calm wash over me. It was one of those rare moments when the world feels completely still and perfect. I slept for a few hours, waking early before dawn. The air was cool and fresh. I packed up my tent and gear quickly, eager to reach the ridge while the weather was still good. The trail climbed steadily up. Trees grew thinner until they disappeared altogether, replaced by rocky ground and patches of snow. The air grew thinner, making my breath shorter and more rapid. I stopped often to rest, drink water, and eat snacks. The views grew wider as I climbed. The valley below, the river winding through the forest, the distant mountain peaks shining in the morning light. About halfway up the ridge, I noticed something unusual. There were footprints in the mud, large and fresh. They looked like human footprints, but oddly spaced, like whoever made them was moving quickly or maybe limping. They headed in the same direction as I was going. First, I thought nothing of it. People hike that trail sometimes, and I assumed the footprints were from someone ahead of me. But as I continued, the trail grew narrower and more exposed. One side dropped off steeply into the valley below. The wind picked up again, cold and sharp. The footprints stopped suddenly near a small rock outcrop. I scanned the area carefully but saw no one. My heart began to beat faster. It was strange to find fresh footprints this high up alone, especially so early in the morning. I decided to keep moving, telling myself that maybe the person had turned back or gone a different way. The path became steeper and rockier. I used my hands to climb over some boulders, careful not to slip. The cold air made my fingers numb. Suddenly, I heard a noise behind me, soft, like a twig snapping. I froze. My eyes scanned the rocky slope below, but I couldn't see anything. The wind might have carried the sound, or maybe it was an animal. I tried to stay calm, but I felt a tight knot in my stomach. I quickened my pace, moving toward the ridge's highest point. The trail was narrow and exposed now, with a sheer drop on my left side. My boots found small ledges and cracks in the rock. The wind gusted strongly, threatening to push me sideways. I hugged the mountain with my body, careful with every step. Near the top, the footprints appeared again. They were clearer this time, pressed into soft soil near a small clearing. I followed them closely, trying to figure out where they led. Then I saw something that froze me in place. Ahead, about 20 feet away, a man was sitting on a rock. He was middle-aged, dressed in worn hiking clothes, his face dirty and tired. His eyes were fixed on the ground, but I could tell he was alive. He looked weak and unwell. Around him were empty cans and some torn pieces of food wrappers. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to disturb him, but I felt a rush of concern. He looked lost, maybe injured. I had seen signs of hikers in trouble before, and I knew the mountains could be unforgiving. I slowly moved closer, keeping a safe distance. I called out softly, but he didn't respond. His breathing was shallow. I realized he might have been stranded here for days. I checked my watch. It was early morning. I didn't have much food or water left, but I had some energy bars and a bottle of water. I knelt down and carefully placed them near him. He didn't react. I debated what to do. The ridge was dangerous, and I wasn't sure if I could help him alone. I thought about going back to get help, but the trail was tough and the weather was unpredictable. Then I saw it, a trail map and a small notebook lying near his feet. The notebook was open, and I picked it up. The pages were filled with shaky writing. It looked like he had been keeping a journal, writing down dates, times, and descriptions of his condition. He had started the hike 5 days ago, planning the same loop I was doing. But somewhere along the way, he had gotten lost or hurt. His last entry said he had been stuck near the ridge, low on food and water, feeling weaker by the day. I felt a chill. I wasn't the only one alone here. I decided to stay with him a little longer, hoping he might regain consciousness. I took out my first aid kit, cleaned a small cut on his arm, and tried to keep him warm with an extra jacket. But he remained still. I knew I couldn't stay too long. I had to finish my hike and get help. I carefully marked his location on my map and took a photo with my phone to show rescuers later. I promised myself I'd come back with help as soon as possible. The climb to the summit was harder now. I was tired, my body stiff from the cold and stress, but I pushed on, reaching the top by midday. The view was incredible, mountains stretching as far as the eye could see, rivers and forests below. The sun was bright, the clouds clearing again. I took a deep breath, feeling both relief and sadness. The way down was slow and careful. I avoided the narrowest paths, sticking to safer parts of the trail. When I reached the forest again, the air was warmer and the ground softer. Back at the trailhead, it was the summer of 2014 when I decided to take a solo hiking trip deep into the Bitterroot Mountains of Montana. I was 27 at the time, looking to disconnect from my everyday life and test my limits out in the wilderness. I had been hiking a few times before, nothing too crazy, just day hikes or short overnight trips. But this time I wanted to challenge myself with a longer route, something remote and less traveled. I had planned a 3-day trek on a less popular trail called the Coyote Ridge Loop. The forest maps and guidebooks described it as scenic but rugged, with steep inclines, dense pine forests, and sweeping views of the valley below. No cell phone signal for miles, just me and the wild. I packed carefully, a 50-liter backpack with a tent, sleeping bag, stove, food, water purification tablets, a compass, maps, a headlamp, a first aid kit, and extra clothes. I left my car at the small trailhead parking lot early in the morning, the sun just rising and casting a golden glow over the distant mountain peaks. The air was crisp and smelled of pine and fresh earth. The parking lot was empty except for my truck, a dusty old Ford Ranger I had bought cheap to take on trips like this. The trail started easy enough, a dirt path lined with tall trees and wildflowers. The ground was soft from recent rain, and the sounds of birds and a nearby creek accompanied me. I felt good, steady. The first few hours passed quickly. The trail climbed steadily, the forest thickening, the trees older and taller. I stopped a few times to rest and eat snacks, nuts, dried fruit, energy bars. The light changed as the day wore on, dappled sunlight through the canopy, making patterns on the mossy ground. Around noon, I reached a fork in the trail. The map showed that the right path led to a scenic overlook with a great view of the valley and was supposed to be part of the loop, while the left path was the main trail continuing toward the campsite. I decided to take the right path first, eager to see the view. The trail narrowed and steepened, rocks jutting out from the soil. I had to watch my footing carefully. The overlook was stunning. From the rocky edge, I could see a vast green valley, patches of farmland, winding rivers, and distant mountain ranges fading into the blue haze. I took photos with my phone, though there was no signal. I felt a mix of awe and peace. I sat down for a while, drank water, and ate some jerky. Then I headed back to the fork to continue toward the campsite. I noticed then that the trail looked less maintained on the way back, with fallen branches and thick underbrush encroaching. The markers on trees were faded or missing. I shrugged it off. Sometimes trails aren't perfect in remote areas. I tried to stay on the path I thought was correct. After a couple of hours, I realized the trail was getting harder to follow. The markers had disappeared entirely. The path became narrow and overgrown, and sometimes I lost it altogether. I stopped and checked my compass and map. The map showed the trail passing near a small stream, but I hadn't seen any water in a long time. I kept moving, trying to find signs of the trail. The forest changed too. The tall pines gave way to smaller trees and dense bushes. The ground was uneven, covered with fallen leaves and broken twigs that snapped under my boots. The sun was lower now, the light dimmer and cooler through the canopy. My sense of direction grew uneasy. I wasn't sure if I was still on the trail or had wandered off. I stopped again and looked around. The silence had deepened. No birds, no insects, just a faint rustling in the distance. My heart started to beat faster. I tried to calm myself. I told myself I just needed to find the stream the map mentioned and I could reorient. I walked downhill, hoping to find water. Then, through a break in the trees, I spotted a narrow trickle running over rocks. Relief flooded me. I headed toward it. But when I reached the stream, something felt wrong. The water was murky and smelled faintly of decay. I looked around and saw no signs of the trail nearby, just thick brush and a steep embankment on one side. I sat down on a rock to rest and think. The sun was dropping fast. I had been walking for hours longer than expected. I drank some water after purifying it with tablets and ate a little food. I pulled out my headlamp just in case. Then I tried to figure out my next step. I looked at the map again, tried to match landmarks, but it was hard. The area looked different in real life, more dense, more wild than the printed map. I started to suspect I was lost. A cold feeling spread inside me. Not panic yet, but deep concern. I wasn't prepared for a full night lost in the forest. The temperature was going to drop soon. My food supplies were limited. I had told no one exactly where I was going or when I would be back. I decided I needed to make a plan to find the main trail or get back to the trailhead. But I didn't want to wander blindly. I tried to remember the directions: north, south, east, west, and orient myself using the sun. I knew the sun was setting roughly in the west. The trailhead was east. I followed the stream downstream, hoping it would lead me to a larger river or road. The ground was slippery with wet leaves and moss. I stumbled a few times, catching myself on branches. The forest grew darker. Shadows thickened. After about an hour, the stream disappeared into a swampy area. The ground was soaked and unstable. I hated the feeling of sinking mud beneath my boots, so I tried to skirt around it. I realized I might be in a part of the forest that few hikers ever saw. I climbed a small hill to get a better view, but the trees blocked most of the horizon. The fading light made it hard to see anything distant. I tried calling out, just in case someone was nearby. My voice sounded small and lost. The cold started to bite at my fingers and toes. I put on an extra layer and zipped up my jacket. I pulled out my flashlight and turned it on. The beam cut through the dimness, illuminating the trunks of trees and patches of brush. As the sky darkened fully, I felt the real weight of being alone in the wilderness, far from civilization, without a clear path. I knew I had to find or build shelter soon or risk hypothermia. I searched for a flat, dry spot to pitch my tent. After some searching, I found a small clearing surrounded by tall pines. The ground was firmer here, and I gathered dry branches and pine needles to line the floor of my tent. I set up the tent carefully, my hands numb and clumsy from cold and exhaustion. Inside the tent, I took out my sleeping bag and arranged my gear. I ate some more food, sipping water cautiously. The silence outside was intense, broken only by the occasional rustle of branches or distant animal sounds. I lay down, exhausted but restless. My mind raced with thoughts of the day's mistakes, the risk I was in, and how I might find my way back tomorrow. I knew the forest could be unforgiving. Around midnight, I was woken by a strange noise outside the tent. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon, but the sounds were heavier and closer, like something large moving through the brush. My heart pounded. I tried to stay quiet, listening. The noise moved around the clearing, slow and deliberate. My flashlight was dead, and I didn't want to unzip the tent. I hoped it would move on. After several tense minutes, the sounds faded into the distance. Sleep was uneasy, full of restless dreams and the feeling of being watched. The next morning, I woke early, stiff and cold. I ate a quick breakfast and packed up. My plan was to follow the stream uphill this time, hoping it connected to a known trail or a logging road. I moved carefully, marking trees with pieces of bright tape from my pack to help retrace steps if needed. The terrain was rough and steep. My boots slipped on wet rocks and moss. After an hour of climbing, I heard a distant rumble, the unmistakable sound of a vehicle engine. Hope flared inside me. I hurried toward the sound, pushing through thick brush and fallen logs. Eventually, I broke through the trees and onto a dirt logging road. The road was wide and muddy but clear of brush. I followed it cautiously, waving my arms in case a truck passed. After about 30 minutes, a pickup truck appeared around a bend. I flagged it down and the driver stopped. He was a rugged man in his 50s working for a logging company. I told him I was lost and needed help. He nodded and radioed for backup. The man drove me back to the trailhead where my truck was parked. It was late afternoon, and I felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. I thanked him silently and got in my truck, starting the engine. On the drive back to town, I kept replaying the experience in my mind. I realized how easy it was to get lost, even with maps and preparation. The wilderness was beautiful but unforgiving, and a small mistake could turn a simple hike into a nightmare. From that trip, I learned many things. I always told someone exactly where I was going after that, carried extra navigation tools, and never underestimated the importance of staying on marked trails. Hiking alone was rewarding. I was 34 when I decided to take a solo hiking trip through northern Idaho. It was September 2021, and the air had just started to cool enough to make hiking long distances more enjoyable. I had taken time off work, not because I needed a break from my job, but because I needed to get away from everything else. Emails, texts, small talk, traffic, everything. I didn't tell many people about the trip, just a couple of friends and my brother. I liked keeping things simple. I'd planned a 3-day loop hike through the Selkirk Mountains, just west of the Montana border. Nothing too technical, just solid hiking and camping through dense pine forests, around a few lakes, and along some rough ridgelines. It was supposed to be quiet, peaceful, uneventful. I parked my car at a small dirt lot near the trailhead around 10 a.m. on a Wednesday. There were no other cars there, which I expected. This wasn't one of those crowded trails you find near ski towns. This one was off the beaten path, a little remote, and perfect for what I wanted: solitude. I wore a lightweight pack with a small tent, a sleeping bag, food for 4 days, a water filter, a GPS unit, a physical map and compass, and a small medical kit. I wasn't reckless. I knew the rules. Stay on the trail, don't take dumb risks, keep aware of your surroundings. I had hiked most of my life and thought I had a solid understanding of how to take care of myself in the woods. The first day went exactly as planned. I covered about 9 miles before setting up camp near a small lake just below tree line. I didn't see a single person the entire day. It was just the sound of my boots, the rustle of the trees, and the occasional bird flitting through the branches. I cooked a simple meal on my small stove, read a few pages from an old paperback I brought along, and went to sleep early. That night was calm. No wind, no strange noises, just the cool whisper of pine trees and the occasional splash of something in the lake. It wasn't until the next day that things started to go wrong. I woke up around 6 a.m. and packed up camp quickly. My goal was to make it to a ridge about 12 miles away before sundown. The map showed a well-maintained trail the whole way. I figured I'd get there by 3 or 4 p.m., set up camp, and have a slow evening. About 5 miles in, I came to a junction that wasn't marked on my physical map. It looked freshly carved, like someone had made a new spur trail off the main route. I pulled out my GPS, but the signal was weak, and the battery was already lower than it should have been. I switched it off to conserve power. I hesitated for a while. The trail I was on looked fine, but the new one seemed slightly more direct, based on where I thought the ridge was. I didn't plan on leaving the trail, not really, but I thought maybe the maps just hadn't been updated. It didn't look sketchy. It was wide, smooth, and sloped gently upward. I made a choice. I wish I hadn't. I followed the new trail for maybe an hour before it started narrowing. At first, I thought it was just overgrown, but soon it was clear this wasn't an official trail. There were no markings, no blazes, no cairns. I started to worry a little but told myself I could just turn around and follow it back if it got too bad. I was still gaining elevation, and I figured I'd hit the ridge sooner or later. Another 30 minutes passed, and the trail started to vanish entirely. It turned into a faint game trail, then into just trampled grass and broken branches. I stopped and took a long drink of water, then checked the GPS again. Still nothing. I stood there for a long moment and thought about going back. That's when I saw something ahead, maybe a quarter-mile off. It looked like a structure, maybe a cabin or a fire lookout tower. Couldn't be sure. My first thought was relief. Maybe someone was there, or at least I'd have a better vantage point to figure out where I was. I pushed ahead. It wasn't a cabin. It was more like a decaying wooden shack, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet. The roof had partially collapsed, and the walls were leaning at strange angles. It looked like it hadn't been used in years. Still, I looked around the area, thinking maybe I could find something useful. An old sign, a trail marker, anything. Instead, I found bones. They weren't fresh. They were picked clean and scattered across a patch of dirt maybe 10 feet from the shack. At first, I told myself they were from a deer. The skull was missing, and the ribcage had been shattered. But the longer I looked, the more uncomfortable I got. The bones were too large, too long, and something about the way they were arranged didn't feel right. I backed away quickly. I didn't like how silent it was. I hadn't seen an animal or heard a bird in hours. The forest felt heavy, like something was watching. I know how that sounds, but this wasn't paranoia. It was instinct, something primal clawing at the back of my skull. I turned around and started back down the way I came, but almost immediately I realized I'd lost the trail. Everything looked the same. Tall trees, dry needles, uneven terrain. The light was changing too. Shadows were stretching longer, the sky turning a deeper shade of gray. I tried to retrace my steps, but the forest had swallowed the path. I couldn't tell where I came from. Panic started to seep in. Not full-blown terror yet, but the edges of it. I stopped walking and sat down, forced myself to breathe slowly. I pulled out my compass and tried to orient myself toward the main trail. I picked a direction, east, and started walking in as straight a line as I could manage. Every 5 or 10 minutes, I'd stop and mark a tree with a quick slash using my knife, just to make sure I wasn't walking in circles. I moved steadily but not fast. I didn't want to twist an ankle or walk right off a ledge. It started getting dark around 6:30 p.m., and I had no choice but to set up camp. I found a relatively flat spot near a small rock outcropping and quickly pitched my tent. I didn't bother cooking dinner. I wasn't hungry. I just sat in the dark, back against a rock, knife in one hand, listening. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd hear something. Twigs snapping, leaves rustling, something moving just out of sight. I told myself it was deer or maybe a bear, but it didn't sound like that. It sounded deliberate, steady, like footsteps. I made it through the night, somehow. When the sky finally started to lighten, I packed up as fast as I could and kept moving east. I didn't care about the ridge anymore. I just wanted to find a trail, a road, anything. That second day was worse. I ran out of water by noon. The streams on the map didn't exist where I was. I finally found a stagnant puddle of green water and had to filter it twice just to get it drinkable. My legs ached. My pack felt heavier than it had 2 days ago. My lips were cracked. My skin burned from sun and wind, and I kept hearing things. Not all the time, but enough. Movement behind me, brief flashes of something dark between the trees. Once I turned around fast enough to catch a shape ducking behind a tree, but it was too far to see clearly. I didn't call out. I didn't want to know. That night, I didn't set up the tent. I just rolled out the sleeping bag and laid down behind a fallen tree, trying to stay hidden. I kept the knife next to me and barely blinked. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pile of bones again. The forest was too quiet. It was like the entire place was holding its breath. The third morning, I woke up to rain. Cold, biting, steady rain. Everything I owned was wet. I packed up in silence and started walking again. I could barely feel my feet anymore. I didn't even know if I was still going east. I started talking to myself out loud. Not real words, just mumbles, grunts, curses. I was losing it. I knew I had to keep moving, but part of me just wanted to sit down and give up. Let the forest take me. Then I found the fence. It was rusty and old, but real. Barbed wire, posts leaning in every direction, half covered in vines. Beyond it, the trees thinned, and I could just make out the edge of a dirt road. I dropped my pack and climbed over. I didn't care about cuts or scrapes. I just ran. I must have looked insane. Mud-covered, filthy, bleeding, barely able to walk straight, but I didn't stop. The road wasn't used often, but it was real. I followed it for hours until I finally saw a parked truck near a trailhead sign. It was empty, but just knowing someone had been there recently gave me enough energy to keep going. Eventually, just before sunset, I reached a paved road. My phone had signal again. I called my brother, barely able to explain what happened. He called search and rescue, but I was already out. They picked me up a few hours later, took me to a hospital. Dehydration, exhaustion, mild hypothermia. That's what they told me. I didn't mention the bones. I didn't mention the shape I saw in the trees. I just said I got lost. That was enough. They never found the shack. I didn't have coordinates, and honestly, I didn't want to go back. The forest hides things. Not everything gets found. I haven't been hiking since. I tell people I just grew out of it, that I got tired of the bugs and the dirt and the weight on my back. It was October of 2019 when I decided to take a break from everything. I had just turned 32 and was living in a small town outside of Eugene, Oregon. Life had been building up for months. Bills piling up, job stress grinding me down, and a breakup that just wouldn't stop spinning in my head. I needed space, something quiet and far from screens, traffic, and people. So I took a week off work, packed up my old hiking gear, and headed for the Willamette National Forest. I'd hiked out there a few times before, but mostly short trails and never alone. This time, I wanted something that would wear me down a little, something that would make the noise in my head shut off. I picked a lesser-known trail I found online, something called Indian Ridge Trail. According to the information I could find, it was about 16 miles one way and not super popular. That was perfect for me. I packed my gear in my beat-up Toyota Tacoma. A good sleeping bag, a small one-person tent, my camping stove, some freeze-dried food, water filter, maps, a decent first aid kit, and layers of clothing. I had a Garmin GPS too, just in case, though I didn't rely on it much. I've always been more of a map and compass type. I left early in the morning and reached the trailhead by around 9 a.m. There were no other cars at the trailhead, which felt good at the time. It meant quiet. I double-checked my pack, locked the truck, and started the trail. The weather was perfect, cool and dry, with a thin fog still hanging in the air from the morning chill. I made good time that first day, probably around 12 miles before I set up camp. The trail was rough in some places, with patches of thick overgrowth and a few fallen trees to climb over, but nothing too difficult. I saw some old boot tracks here and there, but they looked weathered, maybe a week or more old. That night, I set up camp near a small clearing that had a flat spot and some space between two big fir trees. I was too tired to do much other than boil some water, eat one of those pasta-in-a-bag meals, and crawl into my sleeping bag. The quiet out there was almost complete. No car noises, no faraway dogs barking, no human sounds at all. Just whined through the trees and a few night birds. The next morning, I woke up early and decided to push toward the end of the trail. My plan was to camp another night at the far end and return the next day. The trail got thinner as I moved along. There were a few sections where it looked like no one had walked through in a while. Branches hung lower, and the ground was soft, covered in moss and pine needles. I had to check the map more often than I thought I would. Some areas had washed out a bit. Around midday, I came to a fork in the trail. It wasn't on the map, but there was a faint path leading left. while the main trail curved right and climbed up a ridge. I hesitated there. The left trail looked narrower and dipped into a hollow filled with thick trees. It didn't seem like part of the original trail, but it was worn enough that someone had been using it, maybe hunters or someone cutting through. That's where I made the mistake. I decided to take the left path. I figured it might be a shortcut or loop back around eventually. I told myself I'd only follow it for a mile or two before deciding whether to turn back. At first, it wasn't too bad. The ground was firm, and the trees were dense but not overwhelming. But after maybe half an hour, the trail got harder to follow. It narrowed so much that I couldn't always see it clearly under the brush, and I started having to look for broken branches or worn spots in the moss to know I was still going the right way. After about an hour on that path, I realized I'd messed up. I hadn't seen any blazes or markers, and the trail had basically disappeared beneath me. I was deep in a stretch of woods that didn't look familiar at all. I stopped, pulled out my map and GPS, and tried to get my bearings. The GPS struggled for a few minutes before catching a signal. I checked it and saw I had gone way off course, several miles off the main trail. The shortcut hadn't been a shortcut at all. It led me into a part of the forest that didn't even have map trails. That was the first moment where I felt that tightness in my chest. The kind that tells you you're alone and very far from help. I tried to stay calm and backtrack, but it turned out to be harder than I thought. The woods looked different going in reverse. I retraced what I thought was the same path, but I wasn't sure. I must have taken a wrong turn, because after another hour I ended up in an area with no clear signs of trail at all. No broken branches, no boot prints, nothing. I was completely off trail now. The light started to fade quicker than usual. The trees in that section were close together, and the canopy above blocked most of the evening sun. I had no choice but to set up camp right where I was. The ground was uneven, and I couldn't find a good spot, so I just cleared away a patch of soft debris near a big cedar and pitched my tent. I was shaken, but I told myself I'd just rest and figure things out in the morning. That night was different. I didn't sleep much. I kept waking up, half dreaming I'd heard footsteps outside the tent or something brushing against the nylon. Once or twice I sat up and unzipped the flap to check, but there was nothing, just cold air and thick silence. In the morning, I tried again to find my way back. I took out the compass and tried to head due north, thinking I'd hit the original trail if I kept going that way long enough. But the terrain got rough. Fallen trees, steep inclines, and thick brush that clawed at my clothes. After hours of pushing through, I started noticing something that made my stomach turn. I started seeing signs that someone or something else had been in the area recently. There were tree stumps that looked freshly cut. Not logging operations, just a single tree here and there, felled crudely, like with a handsaw or hatchet. I found a pile of old tin cans at the base of a rock formation, rusted but not ancient. Then a torn-up tarp, sun-faded and stiff, caught on some branches. And at one point I came across a fire ring. Not an official campsite, just rocks stacked in a circle with blackened wood inside. It was cold, but not weathered, maybe a few days old. There were no clear signs of who made it. No footprints I could see, no gear or trash. Just that ring and nearby a pair of gloves. One glove was torn open down the middle, the fingers stiff and caked with old mud. That was when something shifted in my gut. I felt it as sure as pain. I wasn't alone out there. I turned around and started walking faster, not really sure what direction I was heading in anymore. I just wanted to put distance between me and that campsite. The ground sloped downhill, and after another half mile or so I came across what looked like an old game trail. It was narrow but walkable, and I followed it for a while, hoping it might lead to a river or road. Instead, it led to something I still can't explain. There was a small shack, if you could call it that, nestled between some thick pines. It was made of rotting planks, the kind you might see in an old logging outpost. No windows, just a door that hung half open. Around it were piles of scrap wood, broken tools, and empty food containers. The place smelled like rot and old gasoline. I stood still for several minutes, heart pounding, just staring at it. I didn't want to go near it, but curiosity pulled me closer. I stayed on the edge of the clearing, maybe 20 feet away. That's when I noticed something, a rope, a thick one, tied between two trees behind the shack. Hanging from it were strips of fabric, shirts maybe, or pants, all sun-bleached and torn, and something else, bones. Small ones, animal bones, I told myself. I backed away slowly, turned, and walked fast, then ran. I didn't look back. I ran until my legs gave out, then walked until I couldn't anymore. I camped that night on a slope, behind a rock outcropping, barely able to eat. The next day, I kept walking. My water ran low, and I was rationing the little food I had left. I hadn't seen a sign of a person, a trail marker, or even an animal. Felt like I'd stepped off the edge of the world. But in the afternoon, just when I was starting to think I wouldn't make it out, I heard something, plain. It was faint and far, but it gave me hope. I moved uphill, toward where I thought the sound had come from. After about another mile of hard climbing, I broke through a tree line and saw a logging road. A real, dirt-covered access road, the kind used by fire crews or service trucks. I almost cried when I saw it. I followed that road for what felt like hours. Eventually, just before sunset, I saw a gate in the distance. Beyond it was another dirt road, and parked on the side of that road was a pickup truck. I waved my arms and walked toward it. There was no one inside, but I waited there for nearly an hour until a man in a forestry uniform pulled up in another vehicle. He was shocked to see me, said no one should have been out in that section of forest. It had been closed for restoration since the summer. They got me to a ranger station. I told them most of what happened, minus the shack. I don't know why I left that part out. I just didn't want to think about it anymore. I never found out who had built that place or why it was out there. The trail I took wasn't listed on any official map. The ranger said there were lots of old trails out there, from hunting paths to forgotten logging roads, but that none of them were safe to hike. The year was 2011. I was 27 years old and had been living in the Pacific Northwest for just over a year. I moved out to Oregon from the Midwest for work, but hiking quickly became my escape, my way of clearing my head. The region was full of dense forests, rolling hills, and mountain trails that seemed to stretch on forever. I knew the general area well, but the forest could always surprise you, especially if you wandered far enough from the beaten path. This particular hike began on a crisp, overcast morning in early October. The air had a chill to it, but the leaves on the trees still clung stubbornly to their branches in bright reds and oranges, making the forest a patchwork of color. I was hiking near Mount Hood, an area with many trails but also known for its remoteness. My goal was to reach a ridge that looked out over a valley where I hoped to watch the sunset. I started my hike around 8 a.m., equipped with a standard pack, water, a first aid kit, some trail snacks, a flashlight, a map, and a compass. I wore my usual hiking boots, a thick flannel shirt, and a waterproof jacket just in case the weather turned. The trailhead was busy with a few other hikers, but I soon left the crowd behind as I veered off onto a lesser-used side path I hadn't explored before. The forest there was thicker, older. The trees were tall and close together, their branches twisting and overlapping to create a canopy that dimmed the light. The ground was soft underfoot, carpeted with pine needles and fallen leaves, damp from last night's rain. The scent of wet earth and pine filled my nose. Occasionally, I heard the distant call of a crow or the rustle of a squirrel in the underbrush. The first couple of hours went smoothly. The trail was faint but passable, marked by a few faded ribbons tied to tree branches. I followed it carefully, using my compass and map to confirm my route. The terrain was uneven with roots and rocks, and I had to climb over a fallen log at one point. I felt a sense of satisfaction, the kind that comes from being out alone in nature, away from the noise and rush of everyday life. Around midday, the trail began to slope upward more steeply. The forest grew quieter. The wind whispered softly through the needles. I stopped for a break at a small clearing with a few jagged rocks and drank some water. The valley below was hidden by the dense trees, but I could see patches of sky between the branches. I felt a chill and pulled my jacket tighter. After the break, I pressed on. The trail narrowed and became less distinct. I had to pay close attention to avoid losing my way. The ribbons were fewer now, and some looked torn or faded. My footsteps were muffled by the thick carpet of moss and leaves. Every so often, I spotted an old tree stump covered in lichen or the occasional bright mushroom growing near the roots. Suddenly, I heard a low snap behind me, like a branch breaking. I froze. I scanned the forest but saw nothing. It was probably a deer or some other animal moving away from me. I took a deep breath and tried to calm my racing heart. I reminded myself I was alone but well prepared. I tightened the straps on my pack and kept moving. The light was shifting now, growing dimmer under the heavy clouds. I looked up to see the sky through the treetops. Thick gray clouds had gathered, threatening rain. I decided to keep moving faster to reach the ridge before dark. The trail grew steeper still, and I had to use my hands at times to steady myself on slippery rocks. As I climbed, I noticed the forest changing subtly. The trees grew more sparse, and the undergrowth gave way to patches of grass and exposed rock. The wind picked up, cold and sharp, rattling the remaining leaves on the branches. I paused for a moment to catch my breath and looked down. The forest floor was now far below, a green sea stretching to the horizon. I pressed on, my boots crunching on the rocky soil. Suddenly, the sky opened up, and a few drops of rain began to fall. I pulled my jacket hood over my head and quickened my pace. The trail led me up to a narrow ridge, jagged rocks on one side and a steep drop on the other. The wind was strong here, and I had to lean into it to keep my balance. I found a small spot sheltered by a boulder and took a moment to rest. The rain had stopped, but the clouds were thick and low. The view was breathtaking, even in the gloom. Below me, the valley stretched out, rivers winding through the trees like silver ribbons. The mountains on the far side were shrouded in mist. Then something caught my eye. In the distance, on a lower slope, I saw movement. At first, I thought it was an animal, a deer or maybe a bear, but the shape was too large and too upright. My heart quickened. I looked more closely. It was a person, or at least someone who looked like one, standing very still. I felt a strange chill that had nothing to do with the cold wind. I scanned the area around the figure but saw no sign of a trail or camp. They stood alone, motionless, almost blending into the trees. I couldn't tell if they were watching me or simply standing there. I decided to keep moving, not wanting to get too close or linger in case it was someone dangerous. I carefully made my way down the ridge, taking a different path that circled around the slope. The forest here was dense again, and I kept my senses sharp. The sun was dipping behind the clouds now, and the forest grew darker. My flashlight was in my pack, but I tried not to use it yet. I didn't want to draw attention if someone was out here. The air smelled damp and cold. I thought about the best way back to the main trail, which I had noted on my map would reconnect a few miles ahead. After what felt like an hour of careful walking, I heard a sound behind me, a crunching of leaves, quick and deliberate. I stopped and turned sharply, shining my flashlight into the trees. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating branches and shadows. There was nothing there. I tried to convince myself it was an animal or the wind, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't leave me. I kept moving, faster now, using the flashlight to light my way. The trail was rough and tangled with roots, and my legs grew tired. Suddenly, I caught sight of a faint glow ahead. It was a campfire, small and low, with smoke curling into the night sky. Relief washed over me. Someone else was here, someone not far away. As I approached the campfire clearing, I saw it was empty. The fire was dying down, but still warm. There were footprints around it, but no person in sight. I called out softly, but only the forest answered back with rustling leaves. I scanned the trees, feeling more uneasy than before. The footprints were fresh, but there was no sign of where the person had gone. I considered waiting for a while, but decided it was better to move on. I was close to the main trail and the road beyond. I followed the faint path through the darkening forest, relying on my compass and map. My mind was racing with questions, but I kept them to myself. The shadows felt longer, and every sound seemed amplified. I stayed alert, watching for any more signs of movement. After nearly 2 hours, I finally reached the main trail. The path was wider, clearer, and I felt my heart rate slow. I picked up my pace, knowing the parking lot and my car were only a couple of miles away. The trees thinned out, and I could see the headlights of cars through the branches. When I reached the parking lot, I was soaked from sweat and cold from the night air. I got into my car and locked the doors. The engine roared to life, and I pulled onto the road. I looked back into the forest one last time, but there was nothing there. Only the quiet, dark woods. In the days after, I told myself it was just my imagination, or maybe someone else out there camping or hiking alone. But something about that silent figure, standing on the slope, and the empty campfire haunted me. I never found out who it was or what they wanted. I haven't gone back to that part of the forest since. It was the spring of 2011 when I decided to hike the Copper Ridge Trail, a remote and rugged path in the Cascade Mountains of Washington State. I was 27 years old then, and I had done several hikes before, but nothing quite like this one. The Copper Ridge was known for its steep climbs, narrow ledges, and stunning views, but also for how quickly weather and conditions could change, and how isolated it was. There were few people on the trail, sometimes none for days. That was exactly why I chose it. I wanted the solitude, the challenge, and the chance to push myself beyond my usual limits. I started early in the morning, just before dawn, with a heavy pack on my back. My backpack was full, extra clothes, food for 5 days, a water filter, a first aid kit, a map, compass, and a flashlight with extra batteries. I carried a camera as well to document some of the views. The air was cool and crisp, with a slight breeze rustling the branches of tall fir trees that lined the first few miles of the trail. The first day was long but not difficult. The path wound through dense forest, with occasional clearings revealing glimpses of snow-capped peaks in the distance. The smell of pine and wet earth was comforting, and the soft crunch of my boots on the dirt trail was steady. I stopped a few times to drink water and catch my breath. I found a flat spot near a small creek to camp for the night, set up my tent, cooked a simple dinner, and lay in my sleeping bag listening to the quiet sounds of the forest settling down for night. The second day, I climbed higher. The trees thinned, and the trail became rockier and steeper. The air was thinner and colder. I kept my pace steady but slow to avoid exhaustion. At one point, I had to cross a narrow ledge with a sheer drop on one side. I was careful, gripping the rock walls where I could, testing each step before moving forward. The views were breathtaking. Vast valleys, rivers winding like silver ribbons, clouds drifting low beneath me. That night, I camped near a small alpine lake. The water was so clear I could see the stones at the bottom. The sky was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across black velvet. I felt peaceful, alone but safe. The wilderness was beautiful, even harsh. I was prepared. I had done my research, planned for emergencies, and trusted my instincts. But things changed on the third day. The morning started bright and clear, but by late afternoon, dark clouds rolled in from the west. The wind picked up cold and sharp. I adjusted my pace, hoping to find a sheltered spot to wait it out. The trail was now at high elevation, rocky and uneven, with patches of snow that hadn't melted yet. The cold bit through my jacket and gloves. I ate a quick snack, drank water, and tried to focus on the trail. As the clouds thickened, the rain began, first a few drops, then a steady downpour. The rocks became slippery, the trail harder to follow. My boots squelched in the mud, and the wind howled between the peaks. I pushed forward, knowing I needed to find shelter before dark. But the trail was exposed, and there were no obvious places to hide. I came to a small group of twisted, wind-bent trees and set up my tent as quickly as I could. The rain beat down in sheets, the wind shaking the fabric like a living thing. Inside the tent, I sat huddled in my sleeping bag, trying to stay warm and dry. The storm raged for hours, thunder echoing through the mountains. I didn't sleep much. The noise, the cold, and the thin air made it hard to rest. When the rain finally stopped the next morning, the trail was soaked and slippery. I packed up and continued, but the storm had changed the landscape. There were small landslides, fallen branches, and mud everywhere. Some parts of the trail were washed out or blocked. At one point, I had to cross a swollen creek, the water rushing fast and high from the melted snow and rain. I found a narrow log bridging the creek and tested it carefully before crossing. My heart pounded with every step. One slip and I would be swept away. I made it across without falling, but the adrenaline stayed with me. By midday, the clouds cleared and the sun came out again, but the temperature stayed cold. I stopped to eat and rest at a rocky outcrop overlooking a deep valley. I drank water from my bottle, filled from the creek earlier after filtering it. The quiet was broken only by the distant cry of a hawk circling high above. I looked down at the valley and saw a patchwork of green and brown, the river glinting far below. The wind was gentler now, and the sky was bright blue. It felt safe again, but I knew I couldn't relax yet. The trail from here was supposed to be easier, descending gradually toward the ranger station at the end of the ridge. I planned to reach it by the fourth day, but I never made it. After the rest, I packed up and started down the trail. The rocks were still wet and slippery. I kept my pace slow, using trekking poles for balance. The trail curved around the mountain, hugging the cliffside. A few times, I paused to take pictures of the landscape, the mountains, the valleys, the trees changing colors with the season. The afternoon passed, and I realized I was moving slower than usual. The exhaustion from the storm and the difficult terrain was catching up with me. My legs felt heavy, and my pack seemed to weigh twice as much. Then, as I rounded a bend, I noticed something odd. The trail ahead was blocked by a large fallen tree, uprooted and stretching across the path. The roots were torn from the earth, and dirt and rocks had shifted in the fall. I stepped closer, testing the ground near the blockage. The soil was loose and unstable. I had two choices: try to climb over the tree and continue, or find a way around. I decided to try around first. I looked for a detour through the forest. The slope was steep, and the ground was covered with dead leaves, loose rocks, and thorny bushes. I moved carefully, trying not to lose my footing. After several minutes, I reached another steep drop-off. The terrain was too dangerous to cross. I went back to the fallen tree and began climbing over it. The bark was wet and slippery. I grabbed a sturdy branch and swung my leg over. My pack shifted, and I lost my balance for a moment. I managed to steady myself, heart pounding. After I got over the tree, the trail was barely visible. The storm had eroded parts of it. I kept my eyes on the map and compass, trying to stay on course. Hours passed, and the sun started to dip low. I realized I was lost. The trail markers were missing or obscured. The map showed I was near a ridge, but I could not find the exact path. The forest around me was thick and darkening. I stopped to rest, sitting on a rock and trying to calm down. I drank water and checked my supplies. I had enough food for another day, but my water was running low. I debated whether to try to backtrack to the last known point or continue forward, hoping to find the ranger station. The thought of spending a cold night out here, lost and alone, was frightening. But I knew panicking wouldn't help. I decided to move downhill, hoping to find a creek or a clearing, and then the trail. As the light faded, I walked slowly, scanning the forest for signs. The sounds of animals were different, more alert, tense. A sudden rustle in the bushes made me freeze. I waited. Nothing moved. My heart pounded in my ears. Night was coming fast. I found a small clearing and set up my tent quickly. I built a small fire from dry twigs and branches I gathered, careful not to start a wildfire. The fire gave me some comfort and warmth. I wrapped myself tightly in my sleeping bag, listening to the forest around me. The wind whispered through the trees. Somewhere nearby, a coyote howled. Sleep was uneasy. The next morning, I woke early and packed up. I knew I had to find help or a trail soon. The sun barely warmed the forest floor as I made my way down the slope. I followed a small creek, hoping it would lead me somewhere. The terrain was rugged, steep inclines, loose rocks, fallen logs. I slipped a few times but caught myself. The creek became wider, and after several hours, I saw signs of human activity. A broken fence post, old tire tracks in the mud. I felt a surge of hope. Following the tracks, I eventually found an old logging road. It was overgrown but still visible. I walked along the road for hours, the sun high overhead now. I was tired, thirsty, but determined. By late afternoon, I heard the sound of an engine. I waved my arms, hoping to attract attention. A pickup truck appeared, dust trailing behind it. The driver saw me and stopped. I was saved. The driver was a local forest ranger who had been out on patrol. He took me back to the ranger station, gave me water and food, and called for help. I was exhausted, sunburned, and dehydrated, but otherwise okay. Later, at the station, I learned that a severe storm had passed through the area the day before, causing landslides and blocking parts of the Copper Ridge Trail. Rescue teams had been searching for lost hikers. I was lucky. I had stayed calm, kept my supplies, and managed to find my way to safety. Reflecting on that experience years later, it was the summer of 2011, and I was 26 years old when I decided to take a solo hiking trip in the Sierra Nevada mountains of California. I wanted to get away from everything. The noise of the city, the endless emails and phone calls, the weight of life. I had been working at a small tech startup for a couple of years, and I felt burned out. Hiking alone felt like the only way to clear my mind. I planned my route carefully. The trail I chose was a loop about 40 miles long, known for its breathtaking views and sparse crowds. I packed my backpack with the basics: tent, sleeping bag, food, water, a first aid kit, a map, and a compass. I also took a GPS device, even though I knew it could fail. I wanted to be prepared but still challenge myself. The plan was to take 4 days to complete the loop, spending 3 nights out in the wilderness. On the first day, the weather was perfect. Clear skies, cool air, and a gentle breeze. The forest was dense, with tall pines and the smell of damp earth. I moved at a steady pace, feeling the crunch of dry leaves and twigs beneath my boots. Around midday, I stopped near a small creek to refill my water bottle and eat some trail mix. The water was cold and fresh, and the sound of the creek was soothing. I took my time, soaking in the quiet. As the afternoon wore on, the trail climbed steadily. The trees thinned out, giving way to rocky ridges and wide-open views of the valley below. I took pictures with my phone, but mostly I just stared at the mountains in the distance. I pitched my tent at a flat clearing near a group of juniper bushes, just as the sun began to set. After eating some canned beans heated over a small camp stove, I settled into my sleeping bag and fell asleep to the sounds of the forest. The second day started early. I packed up quickly, eager to reach the high point of the trail by midday. The air was cooler at the higher elevation, and the path was steep and rough. Small patches of snow still clung to the shaded areas. As I climbed, I noticed signs of animals. Tracks in the dirt, broken branches, and scat. Mostly deer, I thought, but I felt a faint unease I couldn't explain. By noon, I reached the summit of a peak called Eagle Ridge. The view was spectacular. Jagged mountain peaks, deep valleys, and a patchwork of green and brown forests stretching to the horizon. I took a long break, drinking water and eating energy bars. The wind was cold, but the sun warmed my face. I felt a rush of pride and calm. After resting, I started my descent on the other side of the ridge. The trail was narrow and slippery, covered with loose gravel and pine needles. My boots slipped a few times and I had to catch myself on trees. I moved carefully, feeling the strain in my legs and knees. Late in the afternoon, I came to a fork in the trail that wasn't marked on my map. I stopped and checked my GPS, but the signal was weak and the screen flickered. I pulled out the compass and tried to get my bearings, but the dense forest around me made it hard to see landmarks. After a few minutes, I decided to take the left path, which looked more traveled. The path quickly became overgrown with shrubs and fallen branches. It was rough going, and the light was fading. I started to worry. This didn't feel right. The trail markers were few and far between. My heart beat faster, but I told myself to stay calm. I kept walking, but after about an hour, I realized I had been going in circles. The terrain looked familiar. The GPS was useless now, the battery low. My map didn't match the trail. Panic began to creep in. I tried to retrace my steps but quickly lost the path altogether. The forest grew darker and thicker. The wind whispered through the trees, and strange sounds echoed in the distance. Twigs snapping, leaves rustling. I told myself it was just animals, but the feeling of being watched was real. Night was coming fast, and I had no choice but to stop and set up camp. I found a small clearing and pitched my tent, but sleep was elusive. Every sound made me jump. I lay awake, staring at the dark forest outside my thin tent walls. The next morning, I tried to stay positive. I rationed my food and water carefully. I knew I had to find the main trail or a road soon. I started walking again, this time following the sun as best I could. Hours passed. I was exhausted, hungry, and thirsty. The terrain was rough and unfamiliar. I stumbled over roots and rocks, scraped my arms on branches. I saw no sign of other hikers or animals. The forest was silent except for the occasional bird call. Then I heard it, a low growl from somewhere ahead. I froze, my breath catching. The growl came again, closer this time. I scanned the trees but saw nothing. My mind raced. Could it be a bear? A mountain lion? I knew I had to stay calm. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on the spot where the sound came from. My legs trembled, but I kept moving. Suddenly, a large brown shape burst from the bushes. A full-grown grizzly bear, massive and powerful. It stood on its hind legs, towering over me. I remembered the advice I had read. Don't run, try to appear bigger, make noise. But my voice caught in my throat. The bear growled again and started moving toward me. My heart pounded in my chest. I reached for my bear spray, fumbling with the canister. My hands were shaking. The bear was closer now, swiping at the air. I sprayed the bear right in the face. It roared, staggered back, then turned and ran away into the forest. I collapsed to the ground, shaking with relief and fear. I stayed quiet for a long time, listening for any other signs of danger. After what felt like hours, I slowly got up and moved on. By late afternoon, I finally stumbled onto a faint trail. It was narrow and barely visible, but it was something. I followed it, hoping it led to civilization. Hours later, I saw a small dirt road. I followed it downhill and, after another mile, reached a ranger station. I was dirty, bruised, and tired, but I was alive. The rangers were surprised to see me and called for help. I was taken to the nearest town, where I rested and recovered. Looking back, I realized how easy it is to get lost in the wilderness and how quickly things can turn dangerous. I was lucky the bear didn't attack, lucky to find my way out. The trip taught me respect for nature and the importance of being prepared, and that sometimes, despite your best plans, survival depends on keeping calm and thinking clearly.